an infinite amount of cash. If the Federal Reserve, there is an infinite amount of cash. If the Federal Reserve, there is an infinite amount of cash. If the Federal Reserve.
Good morning, Bitcoin. Today is Wednesday, June 3rd, 2020. My name is Thomas Hunt, and this is the World Crypto Network. The price of Bitcoin is up 0.91% in the last 24 hours, with a last of 9,590, a high of 9,640, and a low of 9,337. That's $1 for 10,428 Satoshis. Checking out the rest of the market stats, volume was back to normal today with only 4,000 Bitcoin trading hand as opposed to around 29,000 yesterday. The market now leans even more long, with 85% of the market going that direction, up from 80% yesterday. Bitcoin dominance continues at around 65.74%. Chapter 12. I shall not be content, till this country can produce every single thing we need, even coffee, cocoa, and rubber, and so keep all our dollars at home. If we can do this, and at the same time work up tourist traffic so that foreigners will come from every part of the world to see such remarkable wonders as the Grand Canyon, Glacier, and Yellowstone, etc., remarkable parks, the fine hotels Chicago, and more, thus leaving their money here, we shall have such a balance of trade as go far to carry out my often criticized yet completely sound idea of from 3,000 to 5,000 per year for every single family. That is, every real American family. Such an aspiring vision is what we want, and not all this nonsense of wasting our time at Geneva and talky talk at Lugano, wherever that is. 0 hour. Burialist wind trip. Election day would fall on Tuesday, November 3rd, and on Sunday evening of the 1st, Senator Wintrip played the finale of his campaign at a mass meeting in Madison Square Garden in New York. The garden would hold, with seats and standing room, around 19,000, and a week before the meeting every ticket had been sold, at from 50 cents to $5, and then, by speculators, resold and resold from $1 to $20. Doremus had been able to get one single ticket from an acquaintance on one of the Hearst dailies, which alone among the New York papers were supporting Windrip. And on the afternoon of November 1st, he traveled the 300 miles to New York for his first visit in 3 years. It had been cold in Vermont, with early snow, but the white drifts lay to the earth so quietly in unstained air that the world seemed a silver-painted carnival left to silence. Even on a moonlit night, a pale radiance came from the snow, from the earth itself, and the stars were drops of quicksilver. But, following the red cap carrying his shabby Gladstone bag, Dormis came out of the Grand Central at 6 o'clock into a gray trickle of cold dishwater from heaven's kitchen sink. The renowned towers which he expected to see on 42nd Street were dead in their mummy cloths of ragged fog. And as so to the mob that with cruel disinterest galloped past him, a new and heedless smear of faces every second, the man from Fort Belula could think only that New York must be holding its country fair somewhere in this clammy drizzle, or else that there is a big fire somewhere. He had sensibly planned to save money by using the subway. The substantial village burger is so poor in the city of Babylon Gardens, and even he remembers that they were still to be found in Manhattan 5-cent trolley cars, in which a rustic might divert himself by looking at sailors and poets and shawled women from the steppes of Kazakhstan. To the red cap he had piped with what he convinced to be travel urbanity. Guess I'll take the trolley. Just a few blocks. But deafened and dizzied and elbow-jabbed by the crowd, soaked and depressed, he took refuge in a taxi. Then wished he hadn't, as he saw the slippery, rubber-covered pavement, and his taxi got wedged among other cars, stinking of carbon monoxide and frenzied tooting for release from the jam. A huddle of robot sheep, bleating their terror with a mechanical lungs of 100 horsepower. He painfully hesitated before going out again from his small hotel in the West 40s, and when he did, he muddily crept among the shrill shop girls, the weary chorus girls, the hard cigar-clamping gamblers, and the pretty young men on Broadway. He felt himself, with the rubbers and umbrella which Emma had forced upon him, a very Caspar milquetoast. He most noticed a number of stray imitation soldiers, without sidearms or rifles, but in a uniform like that of an American cavalryman from the 1870s. Slant-topped blue forage caps, dark blue tunics, light blue trousers with yellow stripes at the seams, tucked into leggings of black, rubbered for what there seemed to be the privates, and boots of sleek black leather for the officers. Each of them had on the right side of his collars the letter MM, and on the left a 5-pointed star. There were so many of them, they swaggered so brazenly, shouldering civilians out of the way, and upon insignificance like Doremus, they looked with frigid insolence. He suddenly understood. These young Condorati were the Minutemen, the private troops of Burialist Wintrip, about which Doremus had been publishing uneasy news reports. He was thrilled and a little dismayed to see them now, the printed words made brutal flesh. 3 weeks ago, Wintrip had announced that Colonel Dewey Hack had founded, just for the campaign, a nationwide league of Windrip marching clubs, to be called the Minutemen. It was probable that they had been in formation for months, since already they had 300,000 or 400,000 members. Doremus was afraid the MMs might become a permanent organization, more menacing than the Ku Klux Klan. Their uniform suggested the pioneer America of Cold Harbor and of the Indian fighters under Miles and Custer. Their emblem, their swastika. Here Doremus saw the cunning and mysticism of Lee Saracen, was a 5-pointed star, because the star on the American flag was 5-pointed, whereas the stars of both the Soviet banner and the Jews, the Seal of Solomon, were 6-pointed. The fact that the Soviet star actually was also 5-pointed, no one noticed, at least during the excited days of regeneration. Anyway, it was a nice idea to have this star simultaneously challenge the Jews and the Bolsheviks. The MMs had good intentions, even if their symbolism did slip a little. Yet the craftiest thing about the MMs it was that they wore no colored shirts, but only plain white when on parade, and light khaki when on outpost duty, so that Buzz Wintrip could thunder, and frequently, black shirts, brown shirts, red shirts, yes, and maybe cow brindle shirts, all these degenerate European uniforms of tyranny. No, sir, the Minutemen are not fascist or communist or anything at all, but plain democratic, the knight champions of the rights of the forgotten men, the shock troops of freedom. Through the welter, before Doremus's eyes, jabbed a flying wedge of Minutemen, led by what was later to recognize as a coronet of MMs. They were not on duty, and they were not belligerent. They were cheering and singing. Beryllius Wintrip went to wash, reminding Doremus of a slightly drunken knot of students from an inferior college after a football victory. He was to remember them so afterwards, months afterwards, when the enemies of the all through the country derisively called them Mickey Mouses and Minis. An old man, shabbily neat, stood blocking them and yelled, "To hell with Buzz! 3 cheers for FDR!" The MMs burst into hoodlum wrath. The cornet in command, a bruiser uglier even than Shad Ludi, hit the old man in the jaw, and he sloped down sickeningly. Then, from nowhere, facing the cornet, there was a chief petty officer of the Navy, big, smiling, reckless. The CPO bellowed in a voice turned to the hurricanes. "Swell bunch of tin soldiers. 9 of you to 1 grandpappy. Just about even." The coronet socked him. He laid out the coronet with 1 foul to the belly. Instantly, the other 8 MMs were on the CPOs like sparrows after a hawk, and he crashed, his face suddenly veal white, laced with rivulets of blood. The 8 kicked him in the head with their thick marching shoes. They were still kicking when Doremus wriggled away, very sick, altogether helpless. He had not turned away quickly enough to avoid seeing an MM trooper, girlish-faced, crimson-lipped, fawn-eyed, throw himself on the fallen coronet and, whimpering, stroke that roundabout's roast beef cheeks with shy gardenia petal fingers. Scary stuff there. This is from Sinclair Lewis. It Can't Happen Here. 1935. Original printing. First edition. It's pretty amazing that a book from 1935 can still work. Not only just the pages, which are etched and nice, or the words, which are probably typewritten and very readable, probably a big press with the letters individually loaded in for each page. Typeset, right? They would call it typeset. Still functional, still works. Pretty amazing, huh? And the message, too. The message still seems powerful. Bitcoin's price drops by 8% in less than 5 minutes. That's exciting, but it can also go up that fast. Bitcoin's price fell by more than $800 under 5 minutes on Tuesday, pushing the broader cryptocurrency market into the red. Hodling sentiment remains strong despite the unprecedented price volatility. Seen in the last 5 months, nearly 60% of Bitcoin's supply hasn't changed hands in over a year, a likely sign investors are holding in expectations of gains. Be short after 10.3K Bitcoin price head fake, veteran trader warns. A brief breakout into bullish territory for BTC/USD was a red herring, says John Bollinger, who is urging caution among traders. Blow to Bitcoin as Coinbase crashes in sudden meltdown. Actually, if you did any journalism at all, Forbes, you would know that Coinbase crashes every single time Bitcoin goes up. And it's horribly embarrassing, not to Bitcoin, but to Coinbase. To be such a leader in this space, to have such an advantage in time and money and resources, and yet not to make a website that doesn't crash when the price moves 5%, is horribly embarrassing. Brian Armstrong should be fired. It's just that simple. At first, it was just funny on Twitter. Haha, Coinbase is down again. Now they're writing articles and claiming that it brings down Bitcoin, when we all know Brian Armstrong isn't into Bitcoin, he's into crypto. The price of Bitcoin is up 0.64% in the last 24 hours, with a last of 9,553, a high of 9,640, and a low of 9,400. Volume was back to normal after the exciting 20,000 bitcoins traded in the last couple days to around 3,649 bitcoins trading hands. The market now surges to 85% margin long, up from 80%, with 65% of the market controlled by Bitcoin. Our top story today, GOP Republican cowards in denial. Look as he holds his hands covered with blood from the tear gas and the protesters smashed with rubber bullets so the president could make a photo op. Let's hear their bold and brave defense of liberty. Let's hear the Republicans stand up for democracy and the people of the streets.
Senator McConnell, was what the president did last night the right thing to do?
Coward.
I wasn't there, so I didn't see exactly what happened.
Liar.
I mean, we all can. I mean, every day I could do better. I try.
What the president did, the peaceful protesters that were dispersed with tear gas, he then walked across the street to the church. Was that the right thing to do?
Coward.
Was clearing the protesters an abuse of power?
Coward. Blood on hands.
I did not think that what we saw last night was the American design.
Coward.
Senator McConnell, was what the president did last night
Cowards.
the right thing to do?
Look at these scum. Look at this. These are your representatives.
I
wasn't there, so I didn't see it. Watch a video, you fool.
We all can. I mean, every day.
Well, we all could do better. Yeah,
what
no
the president
shit.
did, the peaceful protesters that were dispersed with tear gas,
Think
he
about
then
it.
walked across
Think
the street
about
to
it.
the church. Was that the right
Run
thing
away.
to do?
Run
Was
away.
clearing the protesters
Run
an abuse of
away,
power?
cowards. Run away from the question. Run away from the reality. American citizens tear gassed in the street out front of the White House for a photo op. You cowards. You pathetic cowards. Look at this scum.
I wasn't there, so I didn't see.
I wasn't there, so I didn't see. Watch a video, you scum.
We all can. I mean,
We all could do better. You could do better. You could stand up for the American people who were tear gassed in the street last night at a peaceful protest.
Was that the right thing to
You
do?
coward.
Was clearing the protesters an
Scum,
abuse of power?
coward with blood on your hands. American people's blood on your hands, Republicans. And if you vote Republican and you don't hold them
Senator McConnell,
responsible,
was what the
it's
president
on
did
your
last night
hands too.
the right thing to do?
Was it the right thing to do, McConnell? You scum. Walk faster. Run away. Run away. Because these questions aren't going to stop. They're going to keep coming. He tear gassed American citizens outside of the White House for a photo op. Do you understand that? Could have been you. Could have been your daughter. Could have been your family. Peacefully protesting the obvious and disgusting murder of a black man in the street. Peacefully protesting. Smashed by tear gas, rubber bullets, and troops with armor and shields. Across from the White House. And these cowards can't even say it's wrong. That's how you know. That's how you know. They can't even say that that is wrong. And if you have people defending it, it's time to get rid of those people. Ban them, block them, remove them from your life. It's over. It's a powerful moment. The Tennessee National Guard lays down their shields at a protest that has made its way up to the steps of the Tennessee Capitol. Watch out for this. Protesters lie down outside of Lafayette Square while chanting, "I can't breathe." This is bad news for the government. The protesters are starting to realize that Gandhi tactics work best. Everyone knows this. It's the hardest thing in the world to do, to sit cross-legged on the ground while people smack you in the head and push you against the cement and kick you over. But it shows everyone right away who's on the wrong side and who's on the right side. The people protesting in the street requesting justice for the murdered black man, George Floyd, are right. The people smashing them, shooting tear gas into them, shooting directly at them with rubber bullets, which is improper, are wrong. There's nothing else left. Join the right side. The separation of the races is not a disease of the colored people, but a disease of the white people. Albert Einstein, 1946, member of the National Association of Colored People. Edward James Olmos. There's a reason you separate military and the police. One fights the enemy of the state, the other serves and protects the people. When the military becomes both, the enemy of the state tends to become the people. It's from his character from Battlestar Galactica, Admiral William Adama, but still powerful words, even if written for a sci-fi drama. That upsy-downy that we had yesterday in Bitcoin, $100 million wiped from BitMEX as Bitcoin dives $1,500 in 3 minutes. So watch out for those shorts and those longs. Watch out for those market limit orders. Bitcoin can move quickly, completely empty you out, and then be right back where you started from. Carrying the Bible and posing with it was strange. Carrying it and not reading a scripture or offering a prayer made it all the stranger, and it made it all the clearer that the Bible was not for reference. It was a prop. Breaking news, Dallas County District Attorney John Creuzot is refusing to take the charge for the protesters who are being arrested, as in he is trying to set them loose. We do not have a statement from the district attorney's office at this time. If the laws are unjust, you must stand up against the laws, even if it is your job to enforce them. Here's peaceful protest.
I can't breathe!
Out there chanting and peacefully assembling. And what do you think the police are going to do to them? You think the police are going to treat them politely, as it says under the First Amendment? The people have the right to peaceably assemble to petition their government for a redress of grievances. Oh, they're bringing up their pepper rifles. Multiple officers, very strong, and they're throwing tear grenades into the crowd. Peaceful protesters attacked by riot police. In America.
Jesus Christ!
Jesus Christ, indeed. They're unarmed. The police continue to fire tear gas and flashbangs at the peaceful crowd. Every day. GOP Senator Ben Sasse slams Trump hard. I'm against clearing out a peaceful protest for a photo op that treats the word of God like a political prop. So there you go. At least one Republican senator can stand up for the truth. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper has just rejected GOP plans for a full-fledged COVID-spreading convention. Says they must have less people and they must all wear masks. The GOP is now looking for other locations to have their infection convention, where they will soon be spreading disease. So far, options are Nashville, Tennessee, or good old Florida. Hope Hicks was behind the Trump photo op that led to peaceful protesters being tear-gassed. Finally, a defense from the Trump administration. Kellyanne Conway, inventor of the term alternative facts, presented her own alternative facts, saying that the photo op is not a photo op. President Trump walked from the White House to the church, held up a Bible, and posed for photos. Most would call that a photo op, but not George Orwell. George Orwell would always say a photo op is not a photo op. Here's another crowd in Richmond, Virginia, peacefully protesting. Not even on a street, if you want to say it's the streets that's the problem. And there it is. The police are firing tear gas canisters into the peaceful protesters who are at a good distance with their hands up. You can see right there, peaceful, attacked by the police. Attacked by the police that we pay for. Tear gas canisters, pepper bullets, rubber bullets, lethal, non-lethal weapons, lethal to democracy, lethal to community policing. Is there anyone out there that still thinks it's a good idea to go to the police with your problems? Let's say if someone was robbing your house, why would you go to the police? They're just going to shoot you. Someone's robbing your business, the police are just going to shoot you. Why would you ever trust the police? This is the end of the ability for the police to enforce laws in America. Listen to the people throwing up from the tear gas. Listen to them coughing, retching, and spitting as they continue to spread the virus. Soon, the police may lock some of these protesters up in small jail cells so that they can work together to spread the virus. Note you're going to want heat-resistant gloves to throw back those tear gas canisters. They are very hot. Also, might want a traffic cone, try to put on top of it, pour water in it, put it out. You see, the peaceful protesters are running away. But where are they going? They're going back home, where they'll never trust police again. If you're a police officer and you're in support of this, you're in support of ending your job. When the police become the military, no one will ever trust the police again. Policing in a community relies entirely on trust. In most situations, the officers are horribly outnumbered by the members of the community at all times. The officers are incredibly reliant on the members of the community to provide them information and to report crimes. If the people don't trust the police, what good are the police? What purpose do they serve? Why do we pay for them? Aubrey Strobel says, the world feels like the final scene of The Joker. And here's a side-by-side video of the president doing his photo op thing and the protesters that they violently cleared out of the public space so the president could have a photo op. Here on your left, you have American citizens being attacked with clubs, flashbang grenades, note the sparks, tear gas, see the puff right there, rubber bullets, pepper bullets, journalists, citizens, visitors attacked so that the president on the right could have a photo op. Here's a camera crew from Australia, punched in the camera. Our allies from Australia fought with us in every single war, punched in the camera by police.
Mounted police have been coming down the street.
Murkowski hides and runs out the door. Not the America that I know. Really bold, Murkowski. Really way to take a stand. And Stonekettle's absolutely right. Really? Because it's the America you voted for. I mean, goddamn, Murkowski. You're not stupid. You're just a sellout and a crook like your dad. You knew who Trump was, and you encouraged and enabled him at every turn. For once in your life, have the guts to own it. We already watched this, the GOP coward senators not commenting on the peaceful protesters being dispersed by tear gas, rubber bullets, flashbang grenades outside of the White House so the president could have a photo op outside a church. Cowards. This is pretty nice. The author says, I know the Hitler picture is photoshopped, and so is this. It's a great shot of Donald Trump standing out front of the church with one of his greatest quotes on the church board behind him. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. Just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the pussy. Oh, Trump, they've already taken down the picture of Trump doing the Hitler wave. Let's see. Does not exist. Bummer. On his way across to the park, he kind of did the Hitler wave. Nell Scoville says, we need to suspend Godwin's law immediately. Trump and the GOP are following Hitler's playbook, and that's not hyperbole. Did you know the Hitler is now trending? Pathetic responses from Republican senators they need to be recalled and removed. William K. Wolfram writes, the U.S. Constitution doesn't self-activate. A president can literally get away with anything if the other branches don't stop him. And Murkowski and Susan Collins both had chances during the impeachment debate to remove President Trump. They failed to do so, and now this is their responsibility. All of this blood is on their hands too. Folks, you want to believe that Lisa Murkowski is some kind of decent person? You go right ahead, but I know better. You think she'll stand up to the Trump, to the GOP? Do you? Tell you what, you call me back when Murky announces her support for Joe Biden. Imagine if our country had a president who tweeted about the murder of black Americans at the hands of police as much as he does about money and shooting people. President Trump writes, Macy's at 34th Street, long the largest single department store anywhere in the world and a point of pride in New York City, was devastated yesterday when hoodlums and thieves vandalized it, breaking almost all of its large panels of storefront glass. What a shame. Bring in the National Guard so they can shoot and murder more Americans. Great. Just great. Here's another split screen. President Trump and his crew walking across the street to the church, and below you can see the riot cops smashing the protesters, beating them with rubber bullets, hitting them with tear gas, smacking them with clubs, pushing them with shields, punching their cameras in the face, performing act after act after act of unnecessary and unmeditated violence against peaceful protesters on American streets so the president can walk across the street and have a photo op. Is this the America you want to live in? Is this enough winning for you? Look at that, holding up the Bible in front of a church. It was worth attacking all of these people to have that photo op. Fist in the air, the land of hypocrisy. Here's another great one. Riot police noticing that the protesters are wearing masks to attempt to protect themselves from the murderous COVID disease, spraying them directly in the face, removing the mask, spraying them in the face, spraying them directly in the face, knocking them down, spraying them directly in the face. This is assault. This is assault. This is not policing. This is not serving the community. Do you have any idea which side you're on now? They're spraying them in the face. They're spraying them in the face, removing their masks, knocking them over, spraying them in the face. Which side are you on now? Which side are you on now? They're spraying them in the face. That's bear mace. That's supposed to be used at a distance of 3 to 5 feet. They're using it at a distance of less than 1 feet. Additionally, the protester was wearing a mask, presumably to protect against the COVID virus, and the police officer, at least he used to be a police officer, now he's a military thug, pulls the mask down. Look right there. Pulls the mask down. Make sure the protester gets bear mace right in their face. Right in their face. In America. This guy works for you. We pay his taxes, salary with our taxes. Right in the face. Only 8,000 views. Right in the face again. Right in the face. Knocks her over. Peaceful protesters sitting on the ground. Pepper sprayed. Bear mace. Right in the face. Right in the face. And the senators from the pathetic Republican Party are now accomplices. Look at the words of the enabling accomplices who allow this to happen. I didn't watch it closely enough to know. Senator Mitt Romney. I don't have any comment on that. Senator Pat Roberts. I'm late for lunch. Senator Rob Portman. Our country is at a breaking point, and these spineless toadies can't even pretend to stand up to their Der Fuhrer. We are living through a tale of two crises, says Senator Chuck Schumer, COVID-19 and racial injustice, and President Trump has been a miserable failure at handling both of them. The police in Compton don't give no fuck about a protest. They don't care about your rights or your life. 1, 2, 3 officers. Kick, punch, kick, punch. Why are these officers beating a man on the ground in Compton? Kick, punch. Here we go. We'll go back. We're on the zoom in. Sorry. He's on the ground. They've got him. They've got 2 officers on him. 3rd officer. Kick, punch. It's not a fucking show. It's not a musical. Kick, punch, kick, punch. It's in America. This is why people are mad at police officers. This is how you lose your ability to police. Your ability to police, as founded in 1829 in Scotland Yard, depends upon the respect of the public. It's the public who comes to you with their crimes. It's the public that reports crimes to you. It's the public that doesn't attack you when they outnumber you hundreds and sometimes thousands to 1. Well, now the thousands are seeing the truth. Camera phones continue to deliver scene after scene of police violence, spraying the protesters in the face, kicking them when they're on the ground, knocking them over when they're on the ground, punching them in the face. How do they think this is going to end? Do you think we're just going to go back to normal policing? Do you think everyone's just going to start trusting the police again? And we're going to have community police like we used to? Good luck. The same people who find it impossible to believe Russia tampered with an election are absolutely certain that every disaffected kid in America is part of a rogue, anarchist superstate. The Onion continues to astound. Trump throws garbage can through McDonald's window before looting $2,000 in Big Macs. Shouting, "Go, go, go," as an alarm blared, President Donald Trump reportedly threw a garbage can through a McDonald's window early Tuesday morning before looting $2,000 in Big Macs. According to sources, Trump, seeming oblivious to the broken glass sticking out of his arm, then proceeded to stuff dozens of Filet-O-Fish sandwiches down the front of his shirt, grab a box of M&M McFlurry toppings, and jump out the window with a duffel bag overflowing with Big Macs and French fries, all before returning back inside the restaurant to put his mouth under the soft-serve machine again. Several eyewitnesses confirmed that when law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, Secret Service members were protecting the president as chocolate shake dripped from his pockets, and numerous apple pies tumbled from his grasp to the glass-strewn concrete. At press time, Trump had reportedly ordered Washington, D.C. to enact yet another curfew so that he could hit the Baskin-Robbins tomorrow. Funny stuff from The Onion in the midst of this horror. In 1984, George Orwell wrote, "The party told you to reject all evidence in front of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command." And again, just ignore that these people were tear gassed so the president could have a press conference and make a photo op across the street from the White House. Just ignore that these people were attacked with clubs and shields and flashbangs and military police officers in America across the street from the White House. Australian cameraman there, punched in the camera, smacked with a shield like Captain America, hit by a baton as they try to walk away in America so the president could have a photo op. Does anyone remember this Trump tweet from the past? He wrote it to Iran. "To the leaders of America, do not kill your protesters. Thousands have already been killed or imprisoned by you, and the world is watching. More importantly, the USA is watching. Turn your internet back on and let reporters roam free. Stop the killing of your great American people." Look, he's trying to figure out how to open it. Woo! Virtually everyone is in agreement that the protests are justified and that the looters are committing a crime. Why is it that it's so infuriating to see the police arrest, beat, and tear gas the protesters while allowing the looters and vandals to destroy businesses with impunity? It's almost like they're working against us. It's almost like they want the riot to go on longer. Tommy Chong writes, Joe Biden has already taken over as the intelligent, calming voice of the people's president, even though we won't be able to vote him in until November 3rd. I hope so, Tommy. Tammy Duckworth, former senator, Democrat from Illinois, called Trump a draft-dodging wannabe tin pot dictator who is perverting the honor of our military by threatening to use it against Americans. Here's shots along the motorcade route as President Trump heads to the St. John Paul II National Shrine in D.C. Protesters everywhere. It's an interesting video. This guy gets his chance to fight a police officer. Looks like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu kind of character. We can see they're boxing, shadow boxing back and forth. The protester then controls the police officer and throws him to the ground, tripping his left leg there with a little Brazilian jiu-jitsu action. Then he's promptly beaten up by 4 different cops. So even if you can fight, it's not a good idea to fight with cops. And even Mr. Brazilian jiu-jitsu there can't fight the 4 people that get on him, pound on him. So still seeing major military hardware move into Washington, D.C. as Washington, D.C.'s unique status as a district, not a state, allowed the president to deploy the military there without having to ask anyone's permission. Major fuel truck like that means they must have a lot of military tanks or trucks to refill. Attorney General Barr personally ordered an attack on peaceful people gathering at a church to clear the way for the president. He should be impeached, removed from office, and charged for his assault on the American people. You ever wondered how much cop union money your city representatives take? Well, it's all public data. Here it is in Los Angeles. Here's how much money the council members in Los Angeles take from the police department union. Looks like $3,500, $5,300, $2,280, $3,000, $4,000, $2,000, $1,000, $2,000. Wow. And this is only for a few years. Oh, they must have gotten more than that. Come on, council members, do more. The only one on this board that we can respect here, and it might even be a misstated data, might be wrong data, but according to this chart, John Lee from District 12 in Los Angeles did not take any police union money. Everyone else took thousands of dollars, and that's only a preliminary report. The police didn't spend millions on this awesome tank just to let protests stay peaceful. From The Onion. In response to concerns that law enforcement officers were escalating violence in the nationwide George Floyd uprising, the Los Angeles Police Department officials announced on Tuesday that they didn't spend millions of dollars on an awesome tank just to let protests stay peaceful. We got the city to drop like $10 million on this sick tank, and you expect we'll just let people stand there chanting? Said LA Police Chief Michael Moore, adding that there was no way in hell that the department would let something like peaceful demonstrations stop them from making use of the vehicle's totally tricked out weapon system, armor, and the ability to ram through virtually anything in its past. I mean, the city wouldn't let the teacher buy a pencil and then tell him not to use it, right? This is the kind of hardware you can't just let sit gathering dust. The same with the grenade launchers, drones, and tear gas. We have whole storage bays full of projectiles, and we're just supposed to not use them? Get real. They wouldn't give us all this killer stuff if we weren't allowed to have a little fun. LAPD officials added that the city's residents deserve to witness the full scope of all the badass shit their tax dollars could do. Aren't we glad that the LA police have a tank? Since 9/11, the federal government has equipped local police with $4.3 billion in military gear. $4.3 billion in military gear, just so they could beat up protesters. Isn't that great? Here's another protester who was arrested for speaking. His voice was so powerful, they had to remove him.
At night because I feel your pain. I feel the pain. I feel the pain of black people. I feel the pain of white people. I feel the pain of innocent cops. I feel the pain. We're all scared. Black, white, cop, doesn't matter. We're all scared. We're living in fear. We gotta stop living in fear. I am not your enemy. You are not my enemy. We have to share this land no matter what. By the end of the day, we have to share this land no matter what. I'm here for you. I'm here with you. I'm not angry at none of you. I love all of y'all. I don't care if you're 5'2". I don't care if you're a 7-footer. I don't care if you're dark skinned. I don't care if you're light skinned. I don't care if you're white. I know. Mask or not, uniform or not. You are my family and I love you and I respect you. And I want to understand y'all. I want to understand.
Oh, they're having a meeting. This isn't good.
I deeply want to understand you. I would love to come to your house. I would love to meet your kids. I would love to meet your family. I would love to.
He's saying such nice things to him. You think they'll come out, maybe shake his hand, maybe give him a hug? Sees the best side of everyone. He wants to go to your house for dinner. They're having a meeting. They're like, yeah, this guy's talking too much. Yeah. Freedom of speech, First Amendment. Nah, we can't have that.
We all have them to some degree. How are you on your good days? Do you want to make a stand? Do you want to make a change? Because if we charge you and you charge us,
you could see him like, you gonna do this? Am I gonna do this? Rock, paper, scissors. Oh, here they come. He was speaking peacefully.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
And they're pulling him out.
What the fuck do you do?
Are you fucking kidding me?
For what? For what?
Freedom of speech!
Peaceful protester pulled out of the crowd and arrested. His crime, speaking truth to power. This is exactly what the First Amendment is supposed to protect. The right of the people to peacefully assemble to request a redress of grievances from the government. The right of the people to speak. Congress shall enforce no law against the right of the people to speak. Meanwhile, the Republican cowards continue to hide. These are your representatives. These are the people you voted to represent you. They won't even stand up.
The right thing to do.
They won't even answer. Look at that coward run away.
Exactly what
Look at this liar.
I mean, we all can.
Oh, we all could do better, yeah.
What
Maybe
the
not.
president did, the peaceful
Look at this,
protesters
won't even
that were
answer.
dispersed with tear gas. He then
Coward.
walked across the street to the church. Was that the right thing to do?
Coward. Runs
Was
from
clearing the
questions.
protesters an abuse of
Coward. Blood on hands. Runs from
I
questions.
did not
Coward.
think that
Blood on hands. This is on you. Cowards. Robert Reich, to the world. We are horrified by another black man murdered by the police, protesters gassed and beaten, journalists jailed. We are ashamed of our president, who fuels division and hatred, and is committed to ending, and we are committed to ending the racism that propelled him to the highest office in the land. Once again, an embarrassing day for America worldwide. It's pretty interesting. Someone hacked the school district's computer system and luckily decided to give it all back to them. He says in his message, you should take a bigger interest in security. At this point in time, I can view all of the medical information of your students, all of their fees, and probably a shit ton of personal information that could be dangerous if it got into the wrong hands. I could create a really hellacious fucking day for you guys right now. Again, I'm not going to. Just trying to make sure you look into securing everything a little bit better. Gotta get going to morning workout, so I'll see you guys never. So it's pretty nice of the white hat hacker to only make fun of them and not to wreck their unsecured systems. Yesterday, check it out on the World Crypto Network. I did a really quick Bitcoin hardware wallet wrap-up. I tried out the Open Dime, the Ballet Crypto, the Digital Bitbox, and the Trezor live on the air with no preparation. So if you want to learn how to set up hardware wallets and maybe see some of the common mistakes or problems you might have, you can try it out. If you're looking to decide what hardware wallet to purchase, maybe you're looking for a lighter hardware wallet to give out for gifts. Something like the Open Dime or the Ballet might be good for that. If you're looking for a stronger hardware wallet to store your money, maybe to put it in a safe deposit box or a safe or bury it under your house, the Bitbox and the Trezor would be better than that. But check it out right here on the World Crypto Network down below. Shout out to Dan Bolser. Dan writes, mad respect for Mad Bitcoins. Brilliant coverage. And he says it reminded him of the coverage of Clay Pigeon, WFMU, the hosts of the Wake and Bake morning show on WFMU. Very cool. Thanks, Dan, for the shout out. And if you've got a Bitcoin hardware wallet that you want me to try out, hit me up in DMs on @MadBitcoins on Twitter, and maybe you'll be included in the next roundup. Shout out to Bobby Lee for the Ballet wallet and Joe from BitBrum for the Digital Bitbox. The other two I bought myself. I did have some minor problems. Just announce them here while I'm here. Ballet Crypto, the link to the wallet download page did not load. I searched it myself in the App Store. And Open Dime, one of the 3 wallets would not set up properly. I copied files, but it wouldn't create the wallet with the randomness. The other 2 worked fine. Got horrifying photos this morning from the Lincoln Memorial where supposedly military units, they don't seem to have insignia or names or divisions or any other identifying badges. They look a lot like the little green men who enforce laws in Russia. Once again, if the officer's not wearing a unit badge, if he's not wearing a name tag, you have no way to identify them, and you have no way to bring any kind of redress afterwards. So it's very much in the military, military, in their interest not to wear a name badge, not to wear identifying markings. That way you can hurt more people and get away with it. Speaking of hurting more people and getting away with it, in New York City, the officers are wearing black mourning bands across their shields and across their hearts for COVID-19. And it just happens to cover up their badge numbers. The point of a police badge is that it has a number on it that you can write down. So if you have a problem with that police officer, let's say he just smashed your girlfriend in the head with a baton, you can write down that number and later on have a grievance against that officer. By covering up the badge numbers, the police are covering up your ability to hold them accountable for busting heads. Way to go, New York police. Way to show the way in covering up. Maybe we could do another one where you just put the black band across the body camera. You could just cover up the video lens of the body camera, something like that, you know, for your honored brothers and sisters, you know. Just cover up all the evidence. Then you can beat up more people in the street. Yeah, all right, woo! I love beating up American people, said the police. And they shouldn't really. Robert Reich, I have held off using the F word for 3.5 years, but there is no longer any honest alternative. Trump is a fascist, and he is promoting fascism in America. Rachel Dr. Bitterkoffer writes, the looters are not protesters. All the footage of looters I've seen, it's been random people taking advantage of the situation to go break into stores and steal shit. Stop blaming it on the protesters. There are now thousands of people peacefully protesting outside of the church in D.C. where Trump took his photo op yesterday. It's almost as if attacking them with tear gas, pepper bullets, flashbang grenades, and pushing them out of the street did no good. It's almost as if those negative actions amplified and spread the word about the protest. Everybody is out there now. Everybody is going to protest. The George Floyd shrine in Minneapolis has grown. You can see this was the spot where he was murdered by police officers in the street. It's grown with flowers and chalk art and is really taking on a kind of a mystical feeling there in the street. And again, just looking at this memorial shows you how this cause has grown and how it continues to grow. Look at the crowd of people around the memorial, as well as the number of flowers and the detail of the artwork on the street. This is America. This right here is the ground zero of what happened to America. And unless it's fixed, the other 3 officers charged, the police chief fired, the police removed, the protests will continue. The president talked to Vladimir Putin right before he started smashing the protesters. Here's a short video about it.
The president talked to Vladimir Putin today,
venting frustration at some of the nation's governors.
You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time.
Senator McConnell, was what the president did last night the right thing to do?
I am mobilizing all available federal resources, civilian and military.
I wasn't there, so I didn't see exactly what happened.
Trump was briefly taken to the White House underground bunker.
Dominate the streets.
Was it an abuse of power, what we saw last night outside the White House?
By the protesters, yes.
What the president did, peaceful protesters that were dispersed with tear gas, was that the right thing to do? Was clearing the protesters an abuse of power?
He was
Look at them
using
run.
our church as a backdrop and in ways that I found to be deeply offensive.
today may be remembered by history for an authoritarian turn.
He walks in Bible high, puts it down, and he starts lying.
Pretty strong commercial right there, prepared in the last 24 hours by actblue.com and Midas Touch. Note all the footage of the Republican cowards refusing to stand up for the American people who were tear gassed, pepper sprayed, and moved aside for a photo op. There is no generic Department of Justice police force, obviously. These men have no badges, no identifying information to say who they represent. It's like Russia's little green men have taken over the nation's capital. When asked, these men only say that they're with the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice has no police force. These are essentially stormtroopers. They do not wear badges. They do not have identifying markings from which branch of the service they're from. They don't wear name tags. They're not identifiable. That means they're not accountable. These are unaccountable military troops on American streets. They're with the Department of Justice. You know, the Justice Keepers. They always smash up people on the street. We've always been at war with Eurasia, never at war with East Asia. Breaking news. Minneapolis Public Schools votes unanimously to terminate its contract with the Minneapolis Police Department in response to the death of George Floyd. Police departments, we can't work with you anymore. We can't have you in our schools. We don't trust you not to murder people and attack them with tear gas and pepper spray. Do you get it? This is just one town. What about all the other towns? We've seen how you've been acting. We have video. We know you punch people in the face. Why would we want you on our schools, on our campuses? Why would you want you to speak to our friends and our students and our teachers? Why would we want these police that are beating American citizens in the street for protesting, why would we want them involved in our civic life at all? That's what they're not seeing. When things go back to normal and we're at the city council meeting or whatever, Why would we ever want the police to be given money again? Why would anyone ever work with them? Who's going to rat anyone out? Who's going to report any crimes? Who's going to tell them that there's a gang over there? There's a gang over there. Why would anyone ever work with these people again? They've lost the public's trust. So hard to gain, so easy to lose. This November, end Trump's American carnage. This was retweeted by a Republican.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. We are one nation, and their pain is our pain.
President Trump tweeting, when the looting starts, the shooting starts.
Their dreams are our dreams.
Unemployment rate past 40 million. Largest unemployment rate since the Depression era.
When you guys put somebody in the car, I said, please don't be too nice. I will fight for you with every breath in my body. There's a chance that it won't spread. And within a couple of days, it's going to be down to close to zero. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
Republican voters against Trump. He's getting it from both sides now. Mark Zuckerberg believes that the president's reference that when the looting starts, the shooting starts, would not be a threat. You're a liar, Zuckerberg, or an idiot. Got good instructions on how to protect your eyes from rubber bullets. You want to have large safety goggles like the ones in this picture. Looks like the safety goggle website, always there to help you with capitalism. Safety glasses may stop a rubber bullet. They suggest ballistic rated safety glasses or goggles. You probably want these ones here. They look like the ones the police have. Anti-fog coating is a must. Airtight seal is something to consider. If you're worried about rubber bullets, it is likely you may come into contact with other risks such as tear gas. An airtight seal will better protect your eyes against additional threats such as tear gas, dust, water cannons, etc. Good to know. Mitch McConnell blocks the Senate resolution condemning Trump's response to protests. As Stone Kettle says, when the United States finally collapses, this guy right here, Senator Mitch McConnell, will be the one most directly responsible. Attorney General Barr personally ordered an attack by armed federal officers on peaceful people in the courtyard of a church. He should be impeached and removed from office immediately for that and everything else he's done to destroy the rule of law in America. Additional information, Ivanka and Jared planned that photo op at the church yesterday, which is why it was so awful in every way. Anybody out there just saying, oh, they're only rubber bullets? Here's a woman who was hit by a rubber bullet in the head. This is a teenager, high school girl. She's going to be permanently disfigured. A bloody chunk of her forehead fell off. She was shot at close range by a rubber bullet. These aren't rubber bullets. These are plastic-coated metal bullets. 2 to 3% of the time they kill. 14 to 18% cause permanent injury and disability. Let's stop using the weapons industry's frame and call these often deadly and maiming weapons what they are. Shout out to Nicholas's brother. He just quit the NYPD. That's what you do. That's what you do when you're given an illegal order. That's what you do when you're ordered to hurt human beings. Mitch McConnell objected to a resolution supporting the constitutional right to peacefully protest, saying violence is unlawful. If you can't, as the majority leader of the Senate, condemn a president who shoots tear gas and rubber bullets at peaceful protesters so he can have a photo op, you've got nothing. Here's a protest in Detroit where someone just got attacked, punched, kneed, and elbowed by the police, who threw his phone and broke his glasses. Wow. Did you see them run in from the back? That was a flanking action right there. So the protesters were fighting the cops on one side here on the left. Then you'll see the police use advanced military tactics surrounding the protesters and rushing them from the back. Look at this. An additional force. Surprise! We've seen this happen in battles. The people in the middle get slaughtered over and over again. And here you can see the protesters are getting slaughtered. The police are running in. They're running in at force. These protesters standing still with signs. Such a risk, such a threat that you have to run at them to cause additional pain and damage. We can see right here the previously protected guy filming. He was with the press there. Smashed. There we go. Bang, bang, bang. There goes his glasses. There goes his phone. And there goes the piece. You think any of those people are ever going to come to the cops again with their troubles and their grievances? Officer, I have some trouble. I've been getting beat up at school. Can you help me? Is that going to happen again? Officer, I saw some men selling drugs over there. Is anyone going to do that ever again? Is anyone ever going to cooperate in a police investigation? Can you imagine the juries? Let's have a jury trial. All vote, no matter the crime, that we should throw it out. Let's nullify every jury in America. Are they ever going to convict anyone again? Is anyone ever going to believe the police when they testify in a trial? Isn't everyone just going to assume they're liars? Isn't that why you keep the public trust instead of destroying it, instead of throwing it to the side? The whole point of a police department is the public trust. It's different than the military. No doubt the military can do this, right? We've got this great footage here in Detroit. I talked to you about military tactics. They've got them on the left side. It looks really peaceful and nice. They're slowly moving in. Then they slam them from the right with a quickly moving, advancing force, clearly outnumbering them, clearly encircling them, clearly attacking them. These are not police. These are military. And when there is no more police and there's only military, and the military is fighting the citizens, it's over. The government's over. The respect is over. The decorum is over. Our ability to work together ever again, it's over. A lot more is ending here. The police's respect is ending. The faith in the police is ending. No one will ever believe in them again. This is a lifelong problem. This doesn't go away. Here's a Republican talking about Trump.
Hi, I'm Eric, a Republican, lifelong Republican from Wisconsin. The last few days have been really interesting. Between tweets of the only good Democrat's a dead Democrat, and when the looting starts, the shooting starts. We thought, that's Trump. That's typical Trump, right? But then yesterday happened. A conference call to governors where he insisted that they dominate or they look like jerks. Dominate protesters. And then a presser in the Rose Garden where he threatened to send the military in to states that couldn't control their protesters. Military on U.S. citizens. And after doing that, they cleared a peaceful protest in the park with flashbangs and tear gas so he could walk dramatically to a church and stand in front of it with a Bible. A church he's been to one other time, on the day he was inaugurated. I don't know what message he's trying to send, but the message I took from that is that he's unfit, and I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. I'm a Republican that's being forced to vote for Joe Biden. Democrats are not our sworn enemies. They are to be argued with on points that we believe strongly in. But the only good Democrat's a dead Democrat. Threatening military force on your citizens, he needs to go.
From a Republican, a lifelong Republican. He needs to go. One-third of America's record unemployment payout hasn't arrived. I know in Nevada they say that the Nevada Department of Unemployment, or Department of Labor it is perhaps, has not sent out the checks. They haven't sent out the checks. So all the corporations, they got millions in dollars in reserve instantly delivered by their pal, the Treasury Secretary. The rest of us, the normal people in the street, 1/3 of the payments haven't arrived. And the second stimulus passed by the House about a week and a half ago has not been addressed by Mitch McConnell and his thugs in the Senate. Good evening from Central South Park, where several thousands have taken to the street chanting, "Fuck your curfew, suck my dick." Let's hear that. We definitely need more drums at protests. That was a good beat there. Joe Biden promises, if he becomes president, that he won't traffic in fear and division or fan the flames of hate. He will seek to heal the racial wounds that have long plagued this country, not use them for political gain. Here's some police officers destroying water bottles that were likely going to be used by the protesters to drink water and not die. Here are the police officers stabbing each water bottle individually with a knife to make sure that the protesters cannot have any water. This is against humans. It's also destruction of property. But, you know, the police wouldn't worry about that. They don't worry about laws. Look at this right here. Can you imagine, like, you went to college, see this guy right here with a knife in the center? He's like, poke, 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 poke. Stab all these water bottles. Deny the protesters of water. Make it harder for them to live and be human beings. Yep, right here. Stab, 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 stab. I'm so glad I became a cop right here. You're like, gosh, I remember one day I hope I become a cop so I can take water away from people. I hope that I can just create a bunch of litter and take water away from people someday. Is it like drugs or something? Are you destroying drugs, officer? No, we're destroying water in case people want to drink it later. Because we want them to be really thirsty and die. It's, you know, we hate human beings. It's a good look, officers. Keep it up. Ice-T reminds us, trust me, if we didn't have cameras, this would all be denied. Especially this water bottle thing. How disgusting. Just destroying water bottles. Denying protesters of water. Here's a large rally in France, underreported perhaps by the American TV. Look at the peaceful rally in France in defiance of a curfew. Are the French police going to come in and smash all these people? All these people? Worldwide protests against America's police brutality. Worldwide. Meanwhile, back in America, the police were trapping protesters on the Manhattan Bridge with no plan. Maybe they just wanted them to jump off. The police would not let the protesters off of either end of the bridge. Once again, using their advanced forces and advanced military tactics against the very people who pay their salary. Look, taxpayer. Look, taxpayer. Look, taxpayer-funded destruction against the taxpayers. Oh, we should give them raises. Please note, lots of body cameras are not blinking tonight. That means they're not turned on. Seems pretty simple to me these days. If you're a police officer and you have a body camera and you turn it off, you should be immediately fired. Your actions should be liable to yourself, and any horrible things that you do that we'll no doubt catch on our own cell phone cameras, you will be personally held responsible for. We need to remove immunity from police officers. If you commit crimes, even if you're a police officer, you should be held accountable. There's some risk of COVID at the protests. Outdoor transmission is not likely, but crowding 100 people into an indoor space overnight, yes, that's how you get a spike. Jails and detention, not protesting, is the big risk. So once again, if the police weren't a militarized force and if they could allow peaceful protests, perhaps we wouldn't try to put all the protests in a single jail cell where they can all get sick and spread the COVID virus. Maybe they want the protesters to die. Sad story as a retired police captain was shot to death by looters at a St. Louis pawn shop. His killing was apparently broadcast on Facebook Live. He died on the sidewalk in front of the shop, which a friend owned, as he checked on it when the alarms went off. Steve King, Republican and racist, lost his primary election. Bye-bye. Ultimately, it was Attorney General William Barr who ordered the move to clear protesters, according to a Justice Department official. Impeach Barr now. Attorney General Barr gave the order to attack peaceful protesters outside of the White House with tear gas, pepper bullets, flashbangs, shields, and clubs. Americans on American soil, peacefully protesting, attacked, ordered by Attorney General William Barr. Think rubber bullets are not painful, they don't hurt people. Think they weren't used at Lafayette Square. Here's the leg of a woman who was at Lafayette Square who was hit by multiple rubber bullets by the police. Hey, GOP, how many people do you think will never again vote for any Republican for any office after yesterday's shit show? I'm one. Signed a former 30-year registered Republican. Actions have consequences. Saying nothing while the American people are attacked and beaten in the street is not likely to endear you to the American electorate, who are the same people getting beaten in the streets. A letter of resignation to Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. Subsecretaries are quitting. Many people are quitting. They say that the defense secretary violated his oath in aiding Trump's attack on the protesters. The House Judiciary Committee has announced actions to hold Attorney General Barr accountable. Nadler is preparing to introduce legislation to cut funding against his office by $50 million. There will also be hearings with Department of Justice whistleblowers and former Department of Justice officials in the coming weeks. I look forward to the moment when Attorney General Barr has to testify and has to say in the affirmative that he ordered the tear gassing, pepper bullets, and attack by police on peaceful protesters outside of the White House, that he ordered it, that the blood is on his hands. Protests near the White House grow a day after police called for people to be cleared. It's almost as if that only brought more people out into the street. It's a great sign from New York City. The police are blocking the subway station so that the protesters can't get home before curfew starts. Great job, NYPD. Way to really shove it to the people that pay your salary. Way to really show those taxpayers who's boss. They want to do the right thing. They want to go home before curfew, but you're blocking their access to the subway. Great stuff, guys. Great stuff. We'll remember this when there are no more police forces, when they defund the NYPD. It'll be because you blocked the subways. It'll be because you trapped those people on that bridge. More people are telling you how to stay safe during a tear gas. You don't want water. You want fresh air. You want to get out of there. More story from Jim Acosta, CNN. Going to the church was Trump's idea, but Trump family members Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, plus close aides Hope Hicks and Mark Meadows, helped Trump put the idea into action. Senior White House officials tell CNN. So already, we know everyone who's responsible for the tear gassing and pepper bulleting of American citizens outside of the White House who are peacefully protesting. We know their names: Donald Trump, Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, Hope Hicks, Mark Meadows, and Attorney General William Barr. Now we know who to hold accountable. I look forward to the hearings. I look forward to each one of these names answering questions under oath, live on TV, at the hearings, telling us why they told the police to attack Americans. It's going to be a great hearing. This is not the right way to go about encryption, Zoom. Security and privacy shouldn't be a luxury feature. Zoom's CEO says that he won't encrypt free calls so that Zoom can work more with law enforcement. Fuck you. Fuck you, Zoom. No one wants to use you anymore, you clowns. At first, you were unencrypted and you were letting random hackers join everyone's phone calls. Now, you want to leave the free people out there so they can be attacked. Oh, our business model is that, you pay us or we rat you out to the FBI. That's a great fucking business model. Great job, guys. You go from being nothing to being a verb to being nothing again. Change your policy, idiot. I find it a bit baffling that there are people claiming that these protests have no concrete demands and are just directionless violence. People are literally holding up signs with their demands written on them in black Sharpie. Check out the fence perimeter around the White House today. The coward-in-chief has installed a larger fence because he's afraid of the people. It's a bad look in a democracy when the leaders fear the people. Maybe you should just resign. Nixon got out of there. He just got on the helicopter and he left. And I think he felt better after that. Really, if you think about this, Nixon never had a fence that big. He was hiding in there too. Trump ordered for peaceful American protesters to be attacked. And then they were. That's what happened. And no fake news blog post will ever change that. If you wanted to remember when a real president walked through the park near the White House, here's President Barack Obama with a minor security force. Didn't even clear out the t-shirt sellers. People are happy to wave at him. Look at this guy. He penetrates security and shakes the president's hand. You can see the Secret Service had his arm in his shirt there. But these guys are non-violent. They're very happy to meet the president, to shake his hand. The president's out for a walk. He's brought his suit coat with him, just in case. Probably a little warm out there in D.C. Look at him shaking hands. He's got a minor group of security here. Some of them went for their weapons there, which is a little creepy, but that's cool. Look at this. President giving hugs. Oh, it's the best day of her life. This is such a contrast from President Trump, who had all those people smashed so he could go stand in front of a church and hold up a Bible. Isn't this a better photo op here? It's completely unplanned. These people are just nice random people here in Washington, D.C. Got to shake the president's hand. They're not scared at all. Like, you see how he's not hurting them? See how, like, he didn't punch any cameramen from Australia? Like, no one had to die so the president could go outside in the old days. You know? It's sad. So sad. One small sign that the protesters aren't the ones causing escalation is they aren't the ones who showed up with tanks. And as the protesters were chanting in Seattle before the police attacked them with tear gas and flashbangs, "Why are you wearing your riot gear? There isn't a riot here." But then they turned it into one. 20 minutes after leaving his job at a Brooklyn hospital on Saturday night, Rain Valentine says he was lying in the fetal position on the sidewalk because he's been beaten and kicked by New York police officers. His hospital ID smeared with his own blood. Medical workers fighting COVID say cops are attacking them. We've got information from Minneapolis. Police are using Safariland riot equipment, the same brand used during Puerto Rico's uprising. Safariland's owner and CEO is Warren Kanders, who was a board member of the Whitney Museum of American Art until protest pushed his resignation. It's time to end these companies that provide military equipment to attack civilians. Safariland, you profit off of other people's pain. And it was about 2 years ago when they were kicked off of the board of the Whitney. Chemical weapons profiteers sit on the boards of major art and cultural institutions. Maybe it's time to stop that. Maybe it's time to get rid of Safariland. America's like Safariland now. Trump demands journalists correct stories on the use of tear gas. According to the Center for Disease Control, it was tear gas. It's a powerful political cartoon. Attorney General William Barr strangling Lady Justice to death. Her comment, she repeats the words of George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe." There's America's military, no names, no branches, no identifying information on the left. And there's The Handmaid's Tale on the right. Only seems like a matter of time. Even Pat Robinson, TV evangelist, tells President Trump that war acts against protesters have made things worse. He says that the president's authoritarian response to First Amendment activity is not cool. Really going out there, Pat Robinson. Really going for it. Not cool. Let's see. There's a little bit more. Is it a time for love or is it a time for war? You know, there's a purpose of everything under heaven, we read in the Bible, and there's a time. It seems like now the time is to say, I understand your pain. I want to comfort you. I think it's time we love each other. But the president took a different course. He said, I am the president of law and order. Then he issued a heads up. He said, I'm ready to send in military troops if the nation's governors don't act to quell the violence that has rocked American cities. Matter of fact, he spoke of them as being jerks. You just don't do that, Mr. President. It isn't cool. Pat Robinson, right-wing televangelist, turns on Donald Trump. It's a great graphic here shared by William Gibson and Rob Fennell. These are the hallmarks of proto-fascism. Let's see if we have any of them here in the United States. Private enforcers at political rallies. Discrediting of the free press. Hyper-militarism. Xenophobia. That means fear of others, fear of aliens. Tolerance for attacks on the marginalized. Appeals to a glorious, mythic past. Strong arm rhetoric. Threats to crush purported enemies. Thinly veiled racism. Open contempt for immigrants. Promises of the future greatness via the magical impact of the great leader. Insistence on allegiance to symbols of patriotism. Threats to undermine the judiciary. Discrediting of elected bodies and officials. Attempts to circumvent the legislative process. Relentless blaming of foreign powers for domestic woes. And demands for unwavering loyalty to a leader. I'd say we have all of those. We got it wrong, says man behind Sweden's virus plan. That's right, the Swedish virus plan led to 3 to 6 times as many deaths as their surrounding Nordic neighbors. Sweden made a bad choice when it went for herd immunity, only getting maybe 20% immunity in exchange for all those deaths. Once again, the protesters are starting to figure it out. They're adopting the unbeatable tactics of Mahatma Gandhi. They are lying down on the Burnside Bridge in Portland, Oregon, blocking traffic and peacefully lying on the ground, simulating the death of George Floyd. This is how you protest. This is how you destroy the other side. Not with violence, but with peace. The police can do nothing against these protesters. They are already on the ground. They are already lying peaceful. And there are thousands of them blocking the entire bridge in Portland. That's how you protest. That's how you win. It's unbeatable. No one can stop that. Meanwhile, back in America, still in America, I am still stunned. The largest police force in the country trapped thousands of people on a bridge hundreds of feet above water for what was essentially a glorified stunt. Elected officials were out of the loop and scrambling to respond. We need answers. Who decided to trap the protesters on the Brooklyn Bridge? Was it the police? It doesn't sound like it was the elected officials. It sounds like the NYPD did it all by themselves, trapping the protesters on both sides, giving them nowhere to escape. There'll be hearings. There'll be trials. We'll find out who did it. There is a world after this, probably. And I wouldn't want to be there if I was one of those people that had attacked the American people. The Atlantic. I only get 4 more articles. Let's make it a good one. History will judge the complicit. Why have Republican leaders abandoned their principles in support of an immoral and dangerous president? On a cold March afternoon in 1949, Wolfgang Leonhard slipped out of the East German Communist Party Secretariat, hurried home, packed what few warm clothes he could fit into a small briefcase, and then walked to a telephone box to call his mother. "My article will be finished this evening," he told her. That was the code they had agreed on in advance. It meant that he was escaping the country, at great risk to his life. Though only 28-year-olds at the time, Leonhard stood at the pinnacle of the new East German elite. The son of German communists, he had been educated in the Soviet Union, trained in special schools during the war, and brought back to Berlin from Moscow in May 1945 on the same airplane that carried Walter Ulbricht, the leader of what would soon become the East German Communist Party. Leonhard was put on a team charged with recreating Berlin's city government. He had one central task: to ensure that any local leaders who emerged from the post-war chaos were assigned deputies loyal to the party. "It's got to look democratic," Ulbricht told him, "but we must have everything in our control." Leonhard had lived through a great deal by that time. While he was still a teenager in Moscow, his mother had been arrested as an enemy of the people and sent to Vorkuta, a labor camp in the far north. He had witnessed the terrible poverty and inequality of the Soviet Union, and he had despaired of the Soviet alliance with Nazi Germany between 1939 and 1941. And he knew of the Red Army's mass rapes of women following the occupation. Yet he and his ideologically committed friends instinctively recoiled from the thought that any of these events were in diametrical opposition to our socialist ideals. Steadfastly, he clung to the belief system he had grown up with. The turning point, when it came, was trivial. While walking down the hall of the Central Committee building, he was stopped by a pleasant-looking middle-aged man, a comrade recently arrived from the West, who asked where to find the dining room. Leonhard told him that the answer depended on what sort of meal ticket he had. Different ranks of officials had access to different dining rooms. The comrade was astonished. "But aren't they all members of the party?" Leonhard walked away and entered his own top category dining room, where white cloths covered the tables and high-ranking functionaries received 3-course meals. He felt ashamed. Curious, I thought, that this had never struck me before. That was when he began to have doubts that inexorably led him to plot his escape. At exactly that same moment, in the same city, another high-ranking East German was coming to precisely the opposite set of conclusions. Markus Wolf was also the son of a prominent German communist family. He had spent his childhood in the Soviet Union, attending the same elite schools for children of the foreign communists as Leonhard did, as well as the same wartime training camp. The two had shared a bedroom there, solemnly calling each other by their aliases. These were the rules of deep conspiracy, although they knew each other's real names perfectly well. Wolf also witnessed the mass arrests, the purges, and the poverty of the Soviet Union, and he also kept face with the cause. He arrived in Berlin just a few days after Leonhard, on another plane full of trusted comrades, and immediately began hosting a program on the new Soviet-backed radio station. For many months he ran the popular "You Ask, We Answer." He gave on-air answers to listeners' letters, often concluding with some form of, "These difficulties are being overcome with the help of the Red Army." In August 1947, the two men met up at Wolf's luxurious 5-room apartment, not far from what was the headquarters of the radio station. They drove out to Wolf's house, a fine villa in the neighborhood of Lake Glenicki. They took a walk around the lake, and Wolf warned Leonhard that changes were coming. He told him to give up hoping that German communism would be allowed to develop differently from the Soviet Union. That idea, long the goal of many German party members, was about to be dropped. When Leonhard argued that this could not be true, he was personally in charge of ideology, and no one had told him anything about a change in direction, Wolf laughed at him. "There are higher authorities than your Central Secretariat," he said. Wolf made clear that he had better contacts and more important friends. At the age of 24, he was an insider, and Leonhard understood finally that he was a functionary in an occupied country where the Soviet Communist Party, not the German Communist Party, had the last word. Famously, or perhaps infamously, Marcus Wolf's career continued to flourish after that. Not only did he stay in East Germany, he rose through the ranks of its nomenclatura to become the country's top spy. He was the second-ranked official at the Ministry of State Security, better known as the Stasi. He was often described as the model for the Carla character in the John Le Carey spy novels. In the course of his career, his Directorate for Reconnaissance recruited agents in the offices of the West German Chancellor and just about every department of the government, as well as at NATO. Both men could see the gap between propaganda and reality, yet one remained an enthusiastic collaborator, while the other could not bear the betrayal of his ideas. Why? Leonard, meanwhile, became a prominent critic of the regime. He wrote and lectured in West Berlin, at Oxford, at Columbia. Eventually, he wound up at Yale, where his lecture course left an impression on several generations of students. Among them was a future U.S. President, George W. Bush, who described Leonard's course as an introduction to the struggle between tyranny and freedom. When I was at Yale in the 1980s, Leonard's course on Soviet history was the most popular on campus. Separately, each man's story makes sense, but when examined together, they require some deeper explanation. Until March 1949, Leonard and Wolf's biographies were strikingly similar. Both grew up inside the Soviet Union. Both were educated in communist ideology, and both had the same values. Both knew that the party was undermining those values. Both knew that the system, allegedly built to promote equality, was deeply unequal, profoundly unfair, and very cruel. Like their counterparts in so many other times and places, both men could plainly see the gap between propaganda and reality. Yet one remained an enthusiastic collaborator, while the other could not bear the betrayal of his ideas. Why? In English, the word collaborator has a double meaning. A colleague can be described as a collaborator in a neutral or a positive sense, but the other definition of collaborator, relevant here, is different. Someone who works with the enemy, with the occupying power, with the dictatorial regime. In this negative sense, collaborator is closely related to another set of words: collusion, complicity, convenience. This negative meaning gained currency during the Second World War, when it was widely used to describe Europeans who had cooperated with Nazi occupiers. At base, the ugly meaning of collaborator carries an implication of treason, betrayal of one's nation, of one's ideology, of one's morality, of one's values. Since the Second World War, historians and political scientists have tried to explain why some people in extreme circumstances become collaborators and others do not. The late Harvard scholar Stanley Hoffman had first-hand knowledge of the subject. As a child, he and his mother hid from the Nazis in La Meule-les-Bains, a village in the south of France. But he was almost modest about his own conclusions, noting that a careful historian would have almost to write a huge series of case histories, for there seemed to be almost as many collaborationisms as there were proponents or practitioners of collaboration. Still, Hoffman made a stab at classification, beginning with a division of collaborators into voluntary and involuntary. Many people in the latter group had no choice. Forced into a reluctant recognition of necessity, they could not avoid dealing with the Nazi occupiers who were running their country. Hoffman further sorted the more enthusiastic voluntary collaborators into two additional categories. In the first were those who worked with the enemy in the name of national interest, rationalizing collaboration as something necessary for the preservation of the French economy or French culture. though of course many people who made these arguments had other professional or economic motives too. In the second, there were the truly active ideological collaborators, people who believed that pre-war Republican France had been weak or corrupt, and hoped that the Nazis would strengthen it, people who admired fascism, and people who admired Hitler. Hoffman observed that many of those who became ideological collaborators were landowners and aristocrats, the cream of the top of the civil service, of the armed forces, of the business community, people who perceived themselves as part of a natural ruling class that had been unfairly deprived of power under the left-wing governments of France in the 1930s. Equally motivated to collaborate were their polar opposites, the social misfits and political deviants who would, in the normal course of events, never have made successful careers of any kind. What brought these groups together was a common conclusion that whatever they had fought about in Germany before June 1940, their political and personal futures would now be improved by aligning themselves together with the occupiers. Like Hoffman, Czeslaw Milosz, a Nobel Prize-winning Polish poet, wrote about collaboration from personal experience. As an active member of the anti-Nazi resistance during the war, he nevertheless wound up after the war as a cultural attaché at the Polish embassy in Washington, serving his country's communist government. Only in 1951 did he defect, denounce the regime, and dissect his experience. In a famous essay, The Captive Mind, he sketched several lightly disguised portraits of real people, all writers and intellectuals, each who had come up with different ways of justifying collaboration with the party. Many were careerists, but Milosz understood that careerism could not provide a complete explanation. To be part of a mass movement was for many a chance to end their alienation, to feel close to the masses, to be united in a single community with workers and shopkeepers. For those tormented intellectuals, collaboration also offered a kind of relief, almost a sense of peace. It meant that once they were no longer constantly at war with the state, no longer in turmoil, once the intellectual has accepted that there is no other way, Milosz wrote, he eats with relish, his movements take on vigor, his color returns. He sits down and writes a positive article, marveling at the ease with which he writes it. Milosz is one of the few writers to acknowledge the pleasure of conformity, the lightness of heart that it grants, and also the way that it solves so many personal and professional dilemmas. We all feel the urge to conform. It is the most normal of human desires. I was reminded of this recently when I visited Marion Berthler in her light-filled apartment in Berlin. During the 1980s, Berthler was one of a very small number of active dissidents in East Germany. Later, in reunified Germany, she spent more than a decade running the Stasi Archive, the collection of former East German secret police files. I asked her whether she could identify among her cohort a set of circumstances that had inclined some people to collaborate with the Stasi. She was put off by the question. Collaboration wasn't interesting, Berthler told me. Almost everyone was a collaborator. 99% of East Germans collaborated. If they weren't working with the Stasi, then they were working with the party, or with the system more generally. Much more interesting, and far harder to explain, was the genuinely mysterious question of why people went against the regime. The puzzle is not why Marcus Wolf remained in East Germany, in other words, but why Wolfgang Leonard did not. Here is another pair of stories, more familiar to American readers. Let's begin this one in the 1980s, when a young Lindsey Graham first served with the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the military legal service in the U.S. Air Force. During some of that time, Graham was based in what was then West Germany, on the cutting edge of America's Cold War efforts. Graham, born and raised in a small town in South Carolina, was devoted to the military. After both his parents died when he was in his 20s, he got himself and his younger sister through college with the help of an ROTC stipend and then an Air Force salary. He stayed in the reserves for 2 decades, even while in the Senate, sometimes journeying to Afghanistan or Iraq to serve as a short-term reserve officer. "The Air Force has been one of the best things that has ever happened to me," he said in 2015. "It gave me a purpose bigger than myself. It put me in the company of patriots." Through most of his years in the Senate, Graham, alongside his close friend John McCain, was a spokesman for a strong military and for a vision of America as a democratic leader abroad. He also supported a vigorous notion of democracy at home. In his 2014 re-election campaign, he ran as a maverick and a centrist, telling The Atlantic that jousting with the Tea Party was more fun than any time I've been in politics. While Graham was doing his tour in West Germany, Mitt Romney became a co-founder and then president of Bain Capital, a private equity firm. Born in Michigan, Romney worked in Massachusetts during his years at Bain, but he also kept, thanks to his Mormon faith, close ties to Utah. While Graham was a military lawyer drawing military pay, Romney was acquiring companies, restructuring them, and selling them. This was a job he excelled at. In 1990, he was asked to run the parent firm, Bain & Company, and during the course of doing so, he became very rich. Still, Romney dreamed of a political career, and in 1994, he ran for the Senate in Massachusetts after changing his political affiliation from independent to Republican. He lost, but in 2002, he ran for governor of Massachusetts as a nonpartisan moderate and won. In 2007, after a gubernatorial term during which he successfully brought in a form of near-universal health care that became a model for Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act, he staged his first run for president. After losing the 2008 Republican primary, he won the party's nomination in 2012 and then lost the general election. Both Graham and Romney had presidential ambitions. Graham staged his own short-lived presidential campaign in 2015, justified on the grounds that the world is falling apart. Both men were loyal members of the Republican Party, skeptical of the party's radical and conspiratorial fringe. Both men reacted to the president candidacy of Donald Trump with real anger, and no wonder. In different ways, Trump's values undermined their own. Graham had dedicated his career to an idea of U.S. leadership around the world, whereas Trump was offering an America First doctrine that would turn out to mean me and my friends first. Romney was an excellent businessman with a strong record as a public servant, whereas Trump inherited wealth, went bankrupt more than once, created nothing of value, and had no governing record at all. Both Graham and Romney were devoted to America's democratic traditions and to the ideals of honesty, accountability, and transparency in public life, all of which Trump scorned. Both were vocal in their disapproval of Trump. Before the election, Graham called him a jackass, a nut job, and a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. He seemed unhappy, even depressed by the election. I happened to see him at a conference in Europe in the spring of 2016, and he spoke in monosyllables, if at all. Romney went further. Let me put it very plainly, he said in March 2016 in a speech criticizing Trump. If Republicans chose Donald Trump as our nominee, the prospects of a safe and prosperous future are greatly diminished. Romney spoke of the bullying, the greed, the showing off, the misogyny, and the absurd third-grade theatrics. He called Trump a con man and a fraud. Even after Trump won the nomination, Romney refused to endorse him. On his presidential ballot, Romney said he wrote in his wife. Graham said he voted for the independent candidate, Evan McMullin. But Trump did become president, and so the two men's convictions were put to the test. A glance at their biographies would not have led many to predict what happened next. On paper, Graham would have seemed, in 2016, like the man with deeper ties to the military, to the rule of law, and to an old-fashioned idea of American patriotism and American responsibility in the world. Romney, by contrast, with his shifts between the center and the right, with his multiple careers in business and politics, would have seemed less deeply attached to those same old-fashioned patriotic ideals. Most of us register soldiers as loyal patriots and management consultants as self-interested. We assume people from small towns in South Carolina are more likely to resist political pressure than people that have lived in many places. Intuitively, we think that a loyalty to a particular place implies loyalty to a set of values. But in this case, the cliches were wrong. It was Graham who made excuses for Trump's abuse of power. It was Graham, a JAG Corps lawyer, who downplayed the evidence that the president had attempted to manipulate foreign courts and blackmail a foreign leader into launching a phony investigation of a political rival. It was Graham who abandoned his own stated support for bipartisanship and instead pushed for a hyper-partisan Senate Judiciary Committee investigation into the former Vice President Joe Biden's son. It was Graham who played golf with Trump, who made excuses for him on television, and who supported the president even as he slowly destroyed the American alliances with the Europeans, with the Kurds, that Graham had defended all his life. By contrast, it was Romney who, in February, became the only Republican senator to break ranks with his colleagues, voting to impeach the president. Corrupting an election to keep oneself in office, he said, is perhaps the most abusive and destructive violation of one's own oath of office that I can imagine. One man proved willing to betray ideas and ideals that he had once stood for. The other man refused. Why? To the American reader, references to Vichy France, East Germany, fascists, and communists may seem over the top, even ludicrous. But dig a little deeper, and the analogy makes sense. The point is not to compare Trump to Hitler or Stalin. The point is to compare the experiences of high-ranking members of the American Republican Party, especially those who work most closely with the White House, to the experiences of Frenchmen in 1940, or of East Germans in 1945, or of Czesław Miłosz in 1947. These are experiences of people who are forced to accept an alien ideology or set of values that are in sharp conflict with their own. Not even Trump's supporters can contest this analogy because of the imposition of an alien ideology is precisely what he was calling for all along. Trump's first statement as president, his inaugural address, was an unprecedented assault on American democracy and American values. Remember, he described America's capital city, America's government, America's congressmen and senators, all democratically elected and chosen by Americans, according to America's 227-year-old Constitution, as an establishment that had profited at the expense of the people. Their victories have not been your victories, he said. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. Trump was stating, as clearly as he possibly could, that a new set of values was now replacing the old, though, of course, the nature of those new values was not yet clear. Almost soon as he stopped speaking, Trump launched his first assault on fact-based reality, a long undervalued component of the American political system. We are not a theocracy or a monarchy that accepts the word of the leader or the priesthood as law. We are a democracy that debates facts, seeks to understand problems, and then legislates solutions, all in accordance with a set of rules. Trump's insistence, against the evidence of photographs, television footage, and the lived experience of thousands of people that the attendance of his inauguration was higher than that of Barack Obama's first inauguration represented a sharp break with that American political tradition. Like the authoritarian leaders of other times and places, Trump effectively ordered that not just his supporters, but also apolitical members of the government bureaucracy to adhere to a blatantly false, manipulated reality. American politicians, like politicians everywhere, have always covered up mistakes, held back information, and made promises they could not keep. But until Trump was president, none of them ever induced the National Park Service to produce doctored photographs, or compelled the White House press secretary to lie about the size of a crowd, or encouraged him to do so in front of a press corps that knew he was lying. The lie was petty, even ridiculous, and that was partly why it was so dangerous. In the 1950s, when an insect known as the Colorado potato beetle appeared in Eastern European potato fields, Soviet-backed governments in the region triumphantly claimed that it had been dropped from the sky by American pilots as a deliberate form of biological sabotage. Posters featuring vicious red, white, and blue beetles went up all across Poland, East Germany, and Czechoslovakia. No one really believed the charge, including the people making it, as archives have subsequently shown. But that didn't matter. The point of the protesters was not to convince people of a falsehood. The point was to demonstrate the party's power to proclaim and promulgate a falsehood. Sometimes the point isn't to make people believe a lie, it's to make people fear the liar. These kind of lies also have a way of building on one another. It takes time to persuade people to abandon their existing value systems. The process usually begins slowly with small changes. Social scientists who have studied the erosion of values and the growth of corruption inside companies have found, for example, that people are more likely to accept the unethical behavior of others if the behavior develops gradually, along a slippery slope, rather than occurring abruptly, according to a 2009 article in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. This happens in part because people have a built-in vision of themselves as moral and honest, and that self-image is resistant to change. Once certain behaviors become normal, then people stop seeing them as wrong. This process happens in politics, too. In 1947, the Soviet military administrators in East Germany passed a regulation governing the activity of publishing houses and printers. The decree did not nationalize the printing presses. It merely demanded that their owners apply for licenses and that they confine their work to books and pamphlets ordered by central planners. Imagine how a law like this, which did not speak of arrests, let alone torture or the Gulag, affected the owner of a printing press in Dresden, a responsible family man with 2 teenage children and a sickly wife. Following its passage, he had to make a series of seemingly insignificant choices. Would he apply for a license? Of course. He needed it to earn money for his family. Would he agree to confine his business to material ordered by the central planners? Yes to that too. What else was there to print? After that, other compromises follow. Though he dislikes the communists, he just wants to stay out of politics. He agrees to print the collected works of Stalin, because if he doesn't do it, others will. When he's asked by some disaffected friends to print a pamphlet critical of the regime, however, he refuses. Though he wouldn't mind going to jail for printing it, his children might not be admitted to university, and his wife might not get her medication. He has to think about their welfare. Meanwhile, all across East Germany, other owners of other printing presses are making similar decisions. And after a while, without anyone being shot or arrested, without anyone feeling particular pangs of conscience, the only books left to read are the ones approved by the regime. The built-in vision of themselves as American patriots, or as competent administrators, or as loyal party members, also created a cognitive distortion that blinded many Republicans and Trump administration officials to the precise nature of the president's alternative value system. After all, the early incidents were so trivial. They overlooked the lie about the inauguration because it was silly. They ignored Trump's appointment of the wealthiest cabinet in history and his decision to stuff his administration with former lobbyists because that's just business as usual. They made excuses for Ivanka Trump's use of a private email account and for Jared Kushner's conflicts of interests because that was just family stuff. One step at a time, Trumpism fooled many of its enthusiastic adherents. Recall that some of the original intellectual supporters of Trump, people like Steve Bannon, Michael Anton, and the advocates of national conservatism, an ideology invented post hoc to rationalize the president's behavior, advertised their movement as a recognizable form of populism, an anti-Wall Street, anti-foreign wars, anti-immigration alternative to the small government libertarianism of the establishment Republican Party. Their Drain the Swamp slogan implied that Trump would clean up the rotten world of lobbyists and campaign finance that distorts American politics, that he would make public debate more honest and legislation more fair. Had this had actually been Trump's ruling philosophy, it might well have posed difficulties for the Republican Party leadership in 2016, given that most of them had quite different values. But it would not necessarily have damaged the Constitution, and it would have not necessarily posed fundamental moral challenges to people in public life. In practice, Trump has governed according to a set of principles very different from those articulated by his original intellectual supporters. Although some of his speeches have continued to use that populist language, he has built a cabinet and an administration that serve neither the public nor his voters, but rather his own psychological needs and the interests of his own friends on Wall Street and in business, and of course, his own family. His tax cuts disproportionately benefited the wealthy, not the working class. His shallow economic boom, engineered to ensure his re-election, was made possible by a vast budget deficit on a scale Republicans once claimed to abhor, an enormous burden for future generations. He worked to dismantle the existing healthcare system without offering anything better, as he'd promised to do, so that the number of uninsured people rose. All the while, he fanned and encouraged xenophobia and racism, both because he found them politically useful and because they are part of his personal worldview. Most important, he has governed in defiance and in ignorance of the American Constitution, notably declaring well into his third year in office that he had total authority over the states. His administration is not merely corrupt, it is also hostile to checks, balances, and the rule of law. He has built a proto-authoritarian personality cult, firing or sidelining officials who have contradicted him with facts and evidence, with tragic consequences for public health and the economy. He threatened to fire a top Center for Disease Control and Prevention official, Nancy Messonnier, in late February after her two blunt warnings about the coronavirus. Rick Bright, a top Health and Human Services official, says he was demoted after refusing to direct money to promote the unproven drug hydroxychloroquine. Trump has attacked America's military, calling his generals a bunch of dopes and babies, and America's intelligence services and law enforcement officers, who he has denigrated as the deep state, and whose advice he has ignored. He has appointed weak and inexperienced acting officials to run America's most important security institutions. He has systematically wrecked America's alliances. His foreign policy has never served any U.S. interests of any kind. Although some of Trump's cabinet ministers and media followers have tried to portray him as an anti-Chinese nationalist, and although foreign policy commentators from all points on the political spectrum have amazingly accepted this fiction without questioning it, Trump's true instinct always has been to side with foreign dictators, including Chinese President Xi Jinping. One former administration official who had seen Trump interact with Xi, as well as with Russian President Vladimir Putin, told me that it was like watching a lesser celebrity encounter a more famous one. Trump did not want to speak to them as a representative of the American people. He simply wanted their aura of absolute power, of cruelty, of fame, to rub off on him and enhance his own image. This, too, has had fatal consequences. In January, Trump took Xi's word when he said that COVID-19 was under control, just as he had believed North Korea's Kim Jong-un when he signed a deal on nuclear weapons. Trump's fawning attitude towards dictators is his ideology at the purest. He meets his own psychological needs first. He thinks about the country last. The truer nature of the ideology that Trump brought to Washington was not America first, but rather Trump first. Maybe it isn't surprising that the implications of Trump first were not immediately understood. After all, the communist parties of Eastern Europe, or if you want a more recent example, the Chavistas in Venezuela, all advertise themselves as advocates of equality and prosperity, even though in practice they created inequality and poverty. But just as the truth about Hugo Chávez's Bolivarian revolution slowly dawned on people, it also became clear eventually that Trump did not have the interests of the American people at heart. And as they came to realize that the president was not a patriot, Republican politicians and senior civil servants began to equivocate, just like people living under an alien regime. In retrospect, this dawning realization explains why the funeral of John McCain in September 8, 2018 looked, and by all accounts, felt so strange. Two previous presidents, one Republican and one Democrat, representatives of the old patriotic political class, made speeches. The sitting president's name was never mentioned. The songs and symbols of the older order were visible too. The battle hymn of the Republic, American flags, two of McCain's sons in their officers' uniforms, so very different from the sons of Trump. Writing in The New Yorker, Susan Glazer described the funeral as a meeting of the resistance under vaulted ceilings and stained-glass windows. In truth, it bore an uncanny resemblance to the 1956 funeral of Laszlo Rajik, a Hungarian communist and secret police boss who had been purged and murdered by his comrades in 1949. Rajik's wife had become an outspoken critic of the regime, and the funeral turned into a de facto political rally, helping set off Hungary's anti-communist revolution a couple of weeks later. Nothing quite so dramatic happened after McCain's funeral, but it did clarify the situation. A year and a half into the Trump administration, it marked a turning point, the moment at which many Americans in public life began to adopt the strategies, tactics, and self-justifications that the inhabitants of occupied countries have used in the past, doing so even though the personal stakes were, relatively speaking, so low. Poles like Milosevic and wound up in exile in the 1950s. Dissidents in East Germany lost the right to work and study. In harsher regimes like that of Stalin's Russia, public protest could lead to many years in a concentration camp. Disobedient Wehrmacht officers were often executed by slow strangulation. By contrast, a Republican senator who dares to question whether Trump is acting in the interest of the country is in danger of what exactly? Losing his seat and winding up with a 7-figure lobbying job or a fellowship at the Harvard Kennedy School. He might meet the terrible fate of Jeff Flake, the former Arizona senator who has been hired as a contributor to CBS News. He might suffer like Romney, who was tragically not invited to the Conservative Political Action Conference, which this year turned out to be a reservoir of COVID-19. Nevertheless, 20 months into the Trump administration, senators and other serious-minded Republicans in public life who should have known better began to tell themselves stories that sound very much like those in Milos's The Captive Mind. Some of these stories overlap with one another. Some of them are just thin cloaks to cover self-interest. But all of them are familiar justifications of collaboration, recognizable from the past. Here are the most popular. We can use this moment to achieve great things. In the spring of 2019, a Trump-supporting friend put me in touch with an administrative official I will call Mark, whom eventually I met for a drink. I won't give details because we spoke informally, but in any case, Mark did not leak information or criticize the White House. On the contrary, he described himself as a patriot and a true believer. He supported the language of America first and was confident that it could be made real. Several months later, I met Mark a second time. The impeachment hearings had begun, and the story of the firing of the American ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, was then in the news. The true nature of the administration's ideology, Trump first, not America first, was becoming more obvious. The president's abuse of military aid to Ukraine and his attacks on civil servants suggested a patriotic White House, not a patriotic White House, but a president focused on his own interests. Mark did not apologize for the president, though. Instead, he changed the subject. It was all worth it, he told me, because of the Uyghurs. I thought I had misheard. The Uyghurs? Why the Uyghurs? I was unaware that anything the administration had done to aid the oppressed Muslim minority in Xinjiang, China. Mark assured me that letters had been written, statements had been made. The president himself had been persuaded to say something at the United Nations. I doubted very much that the Uyghurs had benefited from these empty words. China hadn't altered its behavior, and the concentration camps built for the Uyghurs were still standing. Nevertheless, Mark's conscience was clear. Yes, Trump was destroying America's reputation in the world, and yes, Trump was ruining America's alliances, but Mark was so important to the cause of the Uyghurs that people like him could, in good conscience, keep working for the administration. Mark made me think of the story of Wanda Tallycoin, a Polish cultural activist who in 1945 felt much the same as he did. Tallycoin had collected and promoted folk art before the war. After the war, she made the momentous decision to join the Polish Ministry of Culture. The communist leadership was arresting and murdering its opponents. The nature of the regime was becoming clear. Tallycoin nevertheless thought she could use her position inside the communist establishment to help Polish designers and artists, to promote their work, and to get Polish companies to mass-produce their designs. But Polish factories, newly nationalized, were not interested in the designs she commissioned. Communist politicians, skeptical of her loyalty, made Tallycoin write articles filled with Marxist gibberish. Eventually she resigned, having achieved nothing she set out to do. A later generation of artists condemned her as a Stalinist and forgot about her. We can protect the country from the president. That, of course, was the argument used by Anonymous, the author of an unsigned New York Times op-ed published in September 2018. For those who have forgotten, a lot's happened since then, that article described the president's erratic behavior, his inability to concentrate, his ignorance, and above all, his lack of affinity for ideals long espoused by conservatives, free minds, free markets, and free people. The root of the problem, Anonymous concluded, was the president's amorality. In essence, the article described the true nature of the alternative value system brought in by the White House by Trump at a moment when not everybody in Washington understood it. But even as they came to understand that the Trump presidency was guided by the president's narcissism, Anonymous did not quit, protest, make noise, or campaign against the president and his party. Instead, Anonymous concluded that remaining inside the system, where they could cleverly distract and restrain the president, was the right course for public servants like then. Anonymous was not alone. Gary Cohen, at the time the White House economic advisor, told Bob Woodward that he'd removed papers from the president's desk to prevent him from pulling out of a trade agreement with South Korea. James Mattis, Trump's original Secretary of Defense, stayed in office because he thought he could educate the president about the value of America's alliances, or at least protect some of them from destruction. This kind of behavior has echoes in other countries and other times. A few months ago in Venezuela, I spoke with Victor Alvarez, a minister in one of Hugo Chavez's governments and a high-ranking official before that. Alvarez explained to me the arguments he had made in favor of protecting some private industry and his opposition to mass nationalization. Alvarez was in the government from the late 1990s to 2006, a time when Chavez was stepping up the use of police against peaceful demonstrators and undermining democratic institutions. Still, Alvarez remained, hoping to curb Chavez's worst economic instincts. Ultimately, he did quit after concluding that Chavez had created a loyalty cult around himself. Alvarez called it a subclimate of obedience and was no longer listening to anyone who disagreed. In authoritarian regimes, many insiders eventually conclude that their presence simply does not matter. Cohen, after publicly agonizing whether the president said there had been fine people on both sides at the deadly white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, finally quit when the president made the ruinous decision to put tariffs on steel and aluminum, a decision that harmed American businesses. Mattis reached his breaking point when the president abandoned the Kurds, America's longtime allies in the war against the Islamic State. But although both resigned, neither Cohen nor Mattis has spoken out in any notable way. Their presence inside the White House helped build Trump's credibility among traditional Republican voters. Their silence now continues to serve the president's purposes. As for Anonymous, we don't know whether he or she remains within the administration. For the record, I note that Alvarez lives in Venezuela, an actual police state, and yet is willing to speak out against the system he helped create. Cohen, Mattis, and Anonymous, all living freely in the United States of America, have not been so brave. I, personally, will benefit. These, of course, are words that few people ever say out loud. Perhaps some do quietly acknowledge to themselves that they have not resigned or protested because it would cost them money or status. But no one wants a reputation as a careerist or a turncoat. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, even Marcus Wolf sought to portray himself as an idealist. He had truly believed in Marxist-Leninist ideals, this infamously cynical man told an interviewer in 1996, and I still believe in them. Many people in and around the Trump administration are seeking personal benefits. Many of them are doing so with a degree of openness that is startling and unusual in contemporary American politics, at least at this level. As an ideology, Trump first suits these people because it gives them license to put themselves first. To pick a random example, Sonny Perdue, the Secretary of Agriculture, is a former Georgia governor and businessman who, like Trump, famously refused to put his agricultural companies into a blind trust when he entered the governor's office. Perdue has never even pretended to separate his political and personal interests. Since joining the cabinet, he has, with almost no oversight, distributed billions of dollars of compensation to farms damaged by Trump's trade policies. He has stuffed his own department with former lobbyists who are now in charge of regulating their own industries. Deputy Secretary Stephen Sensky was for 21 years the CEO of the American Soybean Association. Brooke Appleton was a lobbyist for the National Corn Growers Association before becoming Sensky's chief of staff, and has since returned to that group. Kaylee Takatz, a member of the Nutritional Advisory Panel, is a former lobbyist for the Snack Food Association. The list goes on, as would lists of similarly compromised people in the Department of Energy, the Environmental Protection Agency, and elsewhere. Perdue's department also employs an extraordinary range of people with no experience in agriculture whatsoever. These modern apparatchiks, hired for their loyalty rather than their competence, include a long-haul truck driver, a country club cabana attendant, the owner of a scented candle company, and an intern at the Republican National Committee. The long-haul truck driver was paid $80,000 a year to expand markets for American agriculture abroad. Why was he qualified? He had a background in hauling and shipping agricultural commodities. I must remain close to power. Another sort of benefit, harder to measure, has kept many people who object to Trump's policies or behavior from speaking out: the intoxicating experience of power and the belief that proximity to a powerful person bestows higher status. This, too, is nothing new. In a 1968 article for The Atlantic, James Thompson, an American East Asia specialist, brilliantly explained how power functioned inside U.S. bureaucracy in the Vietnam era. When the war in Vietnam was going badly, many people did not resign or speak out in public because preserving their effectiveness, a mysterious combination of training, style, and connections, as Thompson defined it, was an all-consuming concern. He called this the effectiveness trap. The inclination to remain silent or to acquiesce in the presence of great men, to live to fight another day, to give on this issue so that you can be effective on later issues, is overwhelming. Nor is it the tendency of youth alone. Some of our most senior officials, men of wealth and fame, whose place in history is secure, have remained silent, lest their connection with power be terminated. In any organization, private or public, the boss will of course sometimes make decisions that his underlings dislike. But when basic principles are constantly violated, and when people constantly defer resignation, I can always fall on my sword next time, the misguided policies go fatally unchallenged. In other countries, the effectiveness trap has other names. In his recent book on Putinism, Between Two Fires, Joshua Yaffa describes the Russian version of this syndrome. The Russian language, he notes, has a word, prisoblimnets, which means a person skilled in the act of compromise and adaptation, who intuitively understands what is expected of him and adjusts his beliefs and conduct accordingly. In Putin's Russia, anyone who wants to stay in the game, to remain close to power, to retain influence, to inspire respect, knows the necessity of making constant small changes to one's own language and behavior, of being careful about what one says to whom one says it, of understanding what criticism is acceptable and what constitutes a violation of the unwritten rules. Those who violate these rules will not, for the most part, suffer prison. Putin's Russia is not Stalin's Russia, but they will experience a painful ejection from the inner circle. For those of you who have never experienced it, the mystical pull of that connection to power, that feeling of being an insider, is difficult to explain. Nevertheless, it is real and strong enough to affect even the highest-ranking, best-known, most influential people in America. John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, named his still unpublished book The Room Where It Happened, because, of course, that's where he has always wanted to be. A friend who regularly runs into Lindsey Graham in Washington told me that each time they meet, he brags about having just met with Trump, while exhibiting high school levels of excitement, as if a popular quarterback has just bestowed some kind of attention on a nerdy debate club leader. The powerful big kid likes me. That kind of intense pleasure is hard to relinquish, and even harder to live without. Lol, nothing matters. Cynicism, nihilism, relativism, amorality, irony, sarcasm, boredom, amusement. These are all reasons to collaborate, and have always been. Marco Martin, a novelist and travel writer who grew up in East Germany, told me that in the 1980s, some of the East German Bohemia, influenced by the then fashionable French intellectuals, argued that there was no such thing as morality or immorality, no such thing as good or evil, no such thing as right or wrong. So you might as well collaborate. This instinct has an American variation. Politicians here who have spent their lives following rules and watching their words, calibrating their language, giving pious speeches about morality and government, may feel a sneaking admiration for someone like Trump, who breaks all the rules and gets away with it. He lies, he cheats, he exhorts, he refuses to show compassion, sympathy, or empathy. He does not pretend to believe in anything or to abide by any moral code. He simulates patriotism with flags and gestures, but he does not behave like a patriot. His campaign scrambled to get help from Russia in 2016. If that's what you say, if it is what you say, I love it, replied Donald Trump Jr. when offered Russian dirt on Hillary Clinton. And Trump himself called on Russia to hack his opponent. And for some of those at the top of his administration and of his party, these character traits might have a deep, unacknowledged appeal. If there is no such thing as moral and immoral, then everyone is implicitly released from the need to obey any rules. If the president doesn't respect the Constitution, then why should I? If the president can cheat in elections, then why can't I? If the president can sleep with porn stars, then why shouldn't I? This, of course, was the insight of the alt-right, which understood the dark allure of amorality, open racism, anti-Semitism, and misogyny long before many others in the Republican Party. Mikhail Bakunin, the Russian philosopher and literary critic, recognized the lure of the forbidden a century ago, writing about the deep appeal of the carnival, a space where everything banned is suddenly allowed, where eccentricity is permitted, where profanity defeats piety. The Trump administration is like that. Nothing means anything. Rules don't matter. And the president is the carnival king. My side might be flawed, but the political opposition is much worse. When Marshal Philippe Pétain, leader of the collaborist France, took over the Vichy government, he did so in the name of the restoration of a France that he believed had been lost. Pétain had been a fierce critic of the French Republic, and once he was in control, he replaced its famous creed, liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, fraternity, with a different slogan, Travail, Famille, Patrie, which is work, family, fatherland. Instead of the false idea of the natural equality of man, he proposed bringing back social hierarchy, order, tradition, and religion. Instead of accepting modernity, Pétain sought to turn back the clock. By Pétain's reasoning, collaboration with the Germans was not merely an embarrassing necessity, it was crucial, because it gave the patriots the ability to fight the real enemy. The French proletarians, socialists, anarchists, Jews, and other assorted leftists and Democrats, he believed, were undermining the nation, robbing it of its vitality, destroying its essence. Rather Hitler than Blum, the saying went, Blum having been France's socialist and Jewish prime minister in the late 1930s. One Vichy minister, Pierre Laval, famously declared that he hoped Germany would conquer all of Europe. Otherwise, he assured it, Bolshevism would tomorrow establish itself everywhere. To Americans, this kind of justification should sound very similar, very familiar. We have been hearing versions of it since 2016. The existential nature of the threat from the left has been spelled out many times. Our liberal left present reality and future direction incompatible with human nature, wrote Michael Anton in the Flight 93 election. The Fox News anchor Laura Ingraham was warned that massive demographic changes threaten us too. In some parts of the country, it does seem like the America we know and love doesn't exist anymore. This is the Vichy logic. The nation is dead or dying, so anything you can do to restore it is justified. Whatever criticisms might be made of Trump, whatever harm he has done to democracy and the rule of law, whatever corrupt deals he might make while in the White House, all of these shrink in comparison to the horrific alternative, the liberalism, socialism, moral decadence, demographic change, and cultural degradation, which would have been the inevitable result of Hillary Clinton's presidency. The Republican senators who are willing to express their disgust with Trump off the record, but voted in February for him to remain in office, all indulge a variation of this sentiment. Trump enables them to get the judges they want, and those judges will help create the America they want. So do the evangelical pastors who ought to be disgusted by Trump's personal behavior, but argue instead that the current situation has scriptural precedence. Like King David in the Bible, the president is a sinner, a flawed vessel, but nevertheless offers a path to salvation for a fallen nation. The three most important members of Trump's cabinet, Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and Attorney General William Barr, are all profoundly shaped by Vichyite apocalyptic thinking. All three are clever enough to understand what Trumpism really means, that it has nothing to do with God or faith, that it is self-serving, greedy, and unpatriotic. Nevertheless, a former member of the administration, one of the few who did decide to resign, told me that both Pence and Pompeo have convinced themselves that they are in a biblical moment. All of the things they care about, outlawing abortion and same-sex marriage, and although this was never said out loud, maintaining a white majority in America, are under threat. Time is growing short. They believe that we are approaching the rapture, and this is a moment of deep religious significance. Barr, in a speech at Notre Dame, has also described his belief that militant secularists are destroying America, that irreligion and secular values are being forced on people of faith. Whatever evil Trump does, whatever he damages or destroys, at least he enables Barr, Pence, Pompeo to save America from a far worse fate. If you are convinced we are living in end times, then anything the president does can be forgiven. I am afraid to speak out. Fear, of course, is the most important reason for any inhabitant of an authoritarian or totalitarian society does not protest or resign, even when the leader commits crimes, violates his official ideology, or forces people to do things that they know are wrong. In extreme dictatorships like Nazi Germany and Stalin's Russia, people fear for their lives. In softer dictatorships like East Germany after 1950 and Putin's Russia today, people fear losing their jobs or their apartments. Fear works as a motivation even when violence is a memory rather than a reality. When I was a student in Leningrad in the 1980s, some people still stepped back in horror when I asked for directions on the street in my accented Russian. No one was going to be arrested for speaking to a foreigner in 1984, but 30 years earlier, they might have been, and the cultural memory remained. In the United States of America, it is hard to imagine how fear could be a motivation for anybody. There have been no mass murders of the regime's political enemies, and there have never ever been. Political opposition is legal. Free press and free speech are guaranteed in the Constitution. And yet, in one of the world's most oldest and most stable democracies, fear is a motive. The same former administration official who observed the importance of apocalyptic Christianity in Trump's Washington also told me with grim disgust that they are all scared. They are not scared of prison, the official said, but of being attacked by Trump on Twitter. They are scared that he will make up a nickname for them. They are scared that they will be mocked or embarrassed like Mitt Romney has been. They are scared of losing their social circles, of being disinvited to parties. They are scared that their friends and supporters, and especially their donors, will desert them. John Bolton has his own super PAC and a lot of plans for how he wants to use it. No wonder he resisted testifying against Trump. Former Speaker Paul Ryan is among the dozens of House Republicans who have left Congress since the beginning of this administration in one of the most striking personal turnovers in congressional history. They left because they hated what Trump was doing to their party and the country. Yet, even after they left, they did not speak out. They are scared, and yet they don't seem to know that this fear has precedence or that it could have consequences. They don't know that similar waves of fear have helped transform other democracies into dictatorships. They don't seem to realize that the American Senate really could become the Russian Duma or the Hungarian Parliament, a group of exalted men and women who sit in an elegant building with no influence and no power. Indeed, we are already much closer to that reality than many could have imagined. In February, many members of the Republican Party leadership, Republican senators, and people inside the administration used various versions of these rationales to justify their opposition to impeachment. All of them had seen the evidence that Trump had stepped over the line in his dealings with the president of Ukraine. All of them knew that he had tried to use American foreign policy tools, including military funding, to force a foreign leader into investigating a domestic political opponent. Yet Republican senators, led by Mitch McConnell, never took the charges seriously. They mocked the Democratic House leaders who had presented the charges. They decided against hearing evidence. With the single exception of Romney, they voted in favor of ending the investigation. They did not use the opportunity to rid the country of a president whose operative value system, built around corruption, nascent authoritarianism, self-regard, and his family's business interests, runs counter to everything that most of them claim to believe in. Just a month later, in March, the consequences of that decision became suddenly clear. After the U.S. and the world were plunged into crisis by a coronavirus that had no cure, the damage done by the president's self-focused, self-dealing narcissism, his one true ideology, was finally visible. He led a federal response to the virus that was historically chaotic. The disappearance of the federal government was not a carefully planned transfer of power to the states, as some tried to claim, or a thoughtful decision to use the talents of private companies. This was the inevitable result of a 3-year assault on professionalism, loyalty, competence, and patriotism. Tens of thousands of people have died, and the economy has been ruined. This utter disaster was avoidable. If the Senate had removed the president by impeachment a month earlier, if the cabinet had invoked the 25th Amendment as soon as Trump's unfitness became clear, if the anonymous and off-the-record official who knew of Trump's incompetence had jointly warned the public, if they had not instead been so concerned about maintaining their proximity to power, if senators had not been scared of their donors, if Pence, Pompeo, and Barr had not believed that God had chosen them to play special roles in this biblical moment, if any of these things had gone differently, then thousands of deaths and a historic economic collapse might have been avoided. The price of collaboration in America has already turned out to be extraordinarily high, and yet the movement down the slippery slope continues, just as it did in many occupied countries in the past. First, Trump's enablers accepted lies about the inauguration. Now, they accept terrible tragedy and the loss of American leadership in the world. Worse could follow. Come November, will they tolerate, even abet, an assault on the electoral system? Open efforts to prevent postal voting, to shut polling stations, to scare people away from voting? Will they countenance violence as the president's social media fans incite demonstrators to launch physical attacks on state and city officials? Each violation of our Constitution and our civic peace gets absorbed, rationalized, and accepted by people who once upon a time knew better. If following what is almost certain to be one of the ugliest elections in American history, Trump wins a second term, these people may well accept even worse, unless, of course, they decide not to. When I visited Marianne Berthler, she didn't think it was interesting to talk about collaboration in East Germany because everybody collaborated in East Germany. So I asked her about dissidents instead. When all of your friends, all of your teachers, and all of your employers are firmly behind the system, how do you find the courage to oppose it? In her answer, Berthler resisted the use of the word courage, just as people can adapt to corruption or immorality, she told me. They can slowly learn to object as well. The choice to become a dissident can easily be the result of a number of small decisions that you take. To absent yourself from the May Day parade, for example, or to not sing the words of the party hymn. And then one day, you find yourself irrevocably on the other side. Often, this process takes role models. You need to see people whom you admire, and you want to be like them. It can even be selfish. You want to do something for yourself, Berthler said, to respect yourself. For some people, the struggle is made easier by their upbringing. Marco Martin's parents hated the East German regime, and so did he. His father was a conscientious objector, and so was he. As far back as the Weimar Republic, his great-grandparents had been part of the anarcho-syndicalist, anti-communist left. He had access to their books. In the 1980s, he refused to join the Free German Youth, the communist youth organization, and as a result, he could not go to university. He instead embarked on a vocational course to train and be an electrician, after refusing to become a butcher. In his electrician training classes, one of the other students pulled him aside and warned him subtly that the Stasi was collecting information on him. "It's not necessary that you tell me all the things you have in mind." He was eventually allowed to immigrate in May 1989, just a few months before the fall of the Berlin Wall. In America, we also have our Marianne Birthlers, our Marco Martins, people whose families taught them respect for the Constitution, who have faith in the rule of law, who believe in the importance of the disinterested public service, who have values and role models from outside the world of the Trump administration. Over the past year, many such people have found the courage to stand up for what they believe. A few have been thrust into the limelight. Fiona Hill, an immigrant success story and a true believer in the American Constitution, was not afraid to testify at the House's impeachment hearings, nor was she afraid to speak out against Republicans who were promulgating a false story of Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves, she said in her congressional testimony. The unfortunate truth is that Russia was the foreign power who systemically attacked our democratic institutions in 2016. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, another immigrant success story and another true believer in the American Constitution, also found the courage first to report on the president's improper telephone call with his Ukrainian counterpart, which Vindman had heard as a member of the National Security Council, and then to speak publicly about it. In his testimony, he had made explicit reference to the values of the American political system, so different from those in the place where he was born. In Russia, he said, offering public testimony involving the president would surely cost me my life. But as an American citizen and public servant, I can live free of fear for mine and my family's safety. A few days after the Senate impeachment vote, Vindman was physically escorted out of the White House by representatives of a vengeful president who did not appreciate Vindman's hymn to American patriotism. Although retired Marine Corps General John Kelly, the president's former chief of staff, apparently did. Vindman's behavior, Kelly said in a speech a few days later, was exactly what we teach them to do from cradle to grave. He went and told his boss what he had just heard. But both Hill and Vindman had some important advantages. Neither had to answer to voters or to donors. Neither had prominent status in the Republican Party. What would it take, by contrast, for Pence or Pompeo to conclude that the president bears responsibility for a catastrophic health and economic crisis? What would it take for Republican senators to admit to themselves that Trump's loyalty cult is destroying the country they claim to love? What would it take for their aides and subordinates to come to the same conclusion, to resign, and to campaign against the president? What would it take, in other words, for someone like Lindsey Graham to behave like Wolfgang Leonard? If, as Stanley Hoffman wrote, the honest historian would have to speak of collaborationisms, because the phenomenon comes in so many variations, the same is true of dissidents, which should probably be described as dissidences. People can suddenly change their mind because of spontaneous intellectual revelations, like the one Wolfgang Leonard had when walking into his fancy nomenclatura dining room with its white tablecloths and three-course meals. They can also be persuaded by outside events, rapid political changes, for example. Awareness that the regime had lost its legitimacy is part of what made Harald Jagger, an obscure and until that moment completely loyal East German border guard, decide on the night of November 9th, 1989, to lift the gates and let his fellow citizens walk through the Berlin Wall, a decision that led over the next days and months to the end of East Germany itself. Jagger's decision was not planned. It was a spontaneous response to the fearlessness of the crowd. Their will was so great, he said years later of those demanding to cross into West Berlin, there was no other alternative than to open the border. But these things are all intertwined. and not easy to disentangle. The personal, the political, the intellectual, and the historical combine differently within every human brain, and the outcomes can be unpredictable. Leonard's sudden revelation may have been building for years, perhaps since his mother's arrest. Jagger was also moved by the grandeur of the historic moment on that night in November, but he had more petty concerns. He was annoyed at his boss, who had not given him clear instructions about what to do. Could some similar combination of the petty and political ever convince Lindsey Graham that he has helped lead his country down a blind alley? Perhaps a personal experience could move him, a prod from someone who represents his former value system, an Air Force buddy, say, whose life has been damaged by Trump's reckless behavior, or a friend from his hometown. Perhaps it requires a mass political event. When the voters begin to turn, maybe Graham will turn with them, arguing, as Jagger did, that their will was so great there was no other alternative. At some point, after all, the calculus of conformism will begin to shift. It will become awkward and uncomfortable to continue supporting Trump first, especially as Americans suffer from the worst recession in living memory and die from the coronavirus in higher numbers than much of the rest of the world. Or perhaps the only antidote is time. In due course, historians will write the story of our era and draw lessons from it, just as we write the history of the 1930s or of the 1940s. The Miloshes and the Hoffmans of the future will make their judgments with the clarity of hindsight. They will see more clearly than we can the path that led the U.S. into a historical loss of international influence, into economic catastrophe, into political chaos of a kind we haven't experienced since the years leading up to the Civil War. Maybe then Graham, along with Pence, Pompeo, McConnell, and a whole host of lesser figures, will understand what he has enabled. In the meantime, I leave anyone who has the bad luck to be in public life at this moment with a final thought from Władysław Bartowski, who was a member of the wartime Polish underground, a prisoner of both the Nazis and the Stalinists, and then, finally, the foreign minister in 2 Polish democratic governments. Late in his life, he lived to be 93, he summed up the philosophy that had guided him through all of these tumultuous political changes. It was not idealism that drove him, or big ideas, he said. It was just this: warto być przyzwoitym. Try to be decent. Just try to be decent. Whether you were decent, that's what will be remembered. Fantastic article by Annie Applebaum, a staff writer at The Atlantic and a senior fellow of the Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. She is the author of Red Famine, Stalin's War on Ukraine, and Twilight of Democracy, The Seductive Lure of Authoritarianism. Writing in The Atlantic magazine, this article appears in the July-August 2020 print edition with the headline, The Collaborators. Thanks so much for joining us. We're just rounding about 3 hours here on the show. It's a good article. Makes you think about why people do the things they do. Used good historical examples to help us use the past to try to understand the present. Stay safe. Stay out of trouble. And we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. Until next time. Bye.